I never believed in anything supernatural. Ghosts, demons, spirits. All of it felt like old campfire stories, excuses for grief, or ways to scare kids into behaving. I've always been the rational one in the family, the big sister who kept everything together. But last fall changed me in ways I still can't explain. My name is E.A. Harper. I'm 24, fresh out of grad school, working remotely from home. When my parents finally booked their long-awaited trip to Spain, I volunteered to stay back and watch my younger siblings, Ethan and Rain. Mom hesitated, mostly because Rain had been off lately. But I convinced her. It was just a week. I knew them better than anyone. At least I thought I did. By the fourth night, I realized I didn't know Rain at all. Rain had always been quiet but never unfriendly. She was artistic, loved sketching strange, intricate things, skeletons, insects, mythical beasts. Her teachers called her imaginative, though I knew she lived more comfortably in her drawings than in conversations. Last year, though, everything shifted. We'd been in a car accident together. I was driving her home from school when a drunk driver ran a red light. The impact crushed the passenger side. I ended up with a fractured collarbone and a concussion. Rain died. For 2 minutes, her heart flatlined. Doctors called it a miracle when she came back. Mom said it was God's grace. But Rain wasn't the same after that. At first, we chalked it up to trauma. She grew distant, slept through most of the days, stopped drawing entirely. Then the headaches started, the sleepwalking. Sometimes her room reeked faintly of rot, like meat left too long in the trash. She claimed it was the plumbing. Little things, easy to dismiss. But that week alone with her and Ethan, those little things grew into something I couldn't ignore, like peeling away a bandage and realizing the skin underneath is black and wet. "Text me if anything happens," Mom said when she called, her voice muffled by wind over the phone. "Rain's been doing better, right?" "Yeah," I lied, forcing a smile into my voice. "Why, go enjoy the beach, I've got this." That night seemed ordinary. We ordered pizza. Ethan played Xbox in the living room. Rain shut herself in her room. I peeked in once. She was sitting on the bed in the dark, eyes wide, staring into the corner like something was there. "Hey, Rain," I said softly. Her head turned slowly, like she had to think about moving it. "Yeah? You good?" "Yeah?" Flat, expressionless. That was it. I closed the door, told myself it was just trauma, and went back to bed. It started around 2:30 a.m., a faint tapping, then scratching. I sat up, heart thudding. Not the heater, not mice. It sounded deliberate, nails dragging over drywall. I crept into the hall. Ethan's door was closed, Rain's too. The sound came from above. I looked up and for a split second, I swear I saw a dark outline pressed against the attic door, as if something was crawling across the ceiling. I blinked and it was gone. The next morning, Ethan came downstairs pale, clutching a mug of water like it was an anchor. "Issa," he whispered. "Something's wrong with Rain." I set my coffee down. "What do you mean?" "I saw her in the kitchen around 4. I thought she was sleepwalking, but..." He trailed off. "But what?" "She was crawling on the floor, in circles, whispering." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed. "What was she whispering?" "My name." His eyes met mine. He wasn't lying. He looked terrified. That night I set up a baby monitor in Rain's room while she brushed her teeth. I tucked it behind some books on her shelf. She didn't notice. At 2:12 a.m., I woke to the sound of chewing. Slow, wet chewing, like teeth sinking into something raw. Then whispers, low and guttural, not English, not any language I recognized. My skin crawled. The next morning at breakfast, I tried to keep my voice steady. "Rain, do you remember anything from last night?" She didn't look up from her cereal. "No. Why?" "You were walking around, whispering." She froze, spoon suspended midair. "I don't sleep well anymore." "Why not?" I pressed. She finally lifted her eyes. and for the first time in days, she looked directly at me, then at Ethan. Her voice was quiet, almost reverent. "I hear them." Ethan's hand clenched around his glass. "Who?" Her lips curled into the faintest smile. "The ones in the dark." Her eyes darkened, the pupils swallowing what little light there was. "The ones inside the walls," she whispered. I froze. "What do they say?" "They want me to open the door." "What door?" I asked, but she didn't answer. She stood up, left her cereal untouched, and walked away like I hadn't spoken at all. I called my friend Julia later that day. She was in grad school for psychology, one of the only people I trusted to give me a grounded answer. "Could this be sleepwalking, or some kind of dissociation?" I asked, pacing the kitchen. She hesitated. "Maybe, but you said she was crawling on walls? That doesn't sound medical." "What if she's faking it?" I pressed, desperate for any explanation. "Then you'd still hear her moving around, furniture scraping, something. You're saying she's up on the ceiling and you don't hear a thing? That's not normal, Harper." I didn't know how to respond. My stomach twisted with dread. That night, Ethan screamed. I bolted to his room and found deep scratches carved into the wood of his door, long, jagged gouges like from claws. He was curled in the corner, sobbing. "She tried to open it with her teeth," he choked out. I ran through the house, heart hammering, until I found her. She was barefoot in the snow, standing perfectly still in the backyard. Her eyes were wide open, arms raised to the sky. Blood dripped from her mouth, staining her teeth. I didn't sleep after that. I sat outside Ethan's room with a baseball bat across my lap, every muscle tensed. Through the vents, I heard her sometimes, giggles, whispers, words I couldn't recognize. Around 3 a.m., I heard movement. I grabbed the baby monitor. Rain's bed was empty. I sprinted to her room. The window was wide open, curtains fluttering. My heart sank. I raced outside and stopped dead. She was clinging to the roof, her body flattened against the shingles like an insect. Her face was pressed against the surface, spine twisted unnaturally. "Rain!" I screamed. She turned her head slowly, too slowly, her neck bending far past what was humanly possible, like an owl swiveling. Her lips peeled back into a smile. I dropped to my knees and vomited into the snow. By morning, I had decided I couldn't keep us in that house another night. I booked a hotel for Ethan and me. Just one more night, I told myself. Just survive this. Before we left, I set up my old GoPros. One in Rain's room, one in the hallway, one in the kitchen. I needed proof. Something. She didn't speak all day, not a word. At 1:44 a.m., there was a knock on my door. I opened it, and there she was. "Can I sleep with you tonight?" she asked softly. I didn't know what to say. I just nodded. She curled at the edge of my bed like a child. I lay stiff under the blankets, watching her. She didn't blink. Not once. At some point, exhaustion pulled me under. When I opened my eyes again, she was gone. Panic surged through me. I tore through the house. Her room, empty. Ethan's room, untouched. The kitchen. The back door swung open. I stumbled outside and screamed. Rain lay sprawled in the grass, face pale, eyes open, blood crusted on her hands. "Rain." I dropped to my knees. She blinked at me, whispering, "It's quiet now." "What's quiet?" My voice cracked. "The house," she murmured. "It's quiet inside." We rushed her to the hospital. Her fever was 104. Doctors said meningitis, maybe triggered by past trauma. They sedated her, ran test after test, but no one could explain the strength, the crawling, the whispers in languages no one recognized. Mom and Dad flew back immediately. Ethan has never talked about that week since. Eventually, the doctors labeled it trauma-induced dissociative psychosis. A diagnosis that felt like a placeholder, not an answer. The strangest part, the ceiling footage from the GoPro deleted itself. Wiped clean. The only thing left is one frame from the hallway camera. Rain, walking backward on all fours, her mouth moving in whispers. And behind her, in the shadows, a tall, thin figure with hollow eyes, its body twisted and wrong. I don't live in that house anymore, but I see her sometimes in my dreams, standing in the corners, lips moving silently. She tells me the door is still there, that one day she'll open it, and when she does, it won't just be for her, it'll be for all of us. I was never really afraid of my sister until the week leading up to my 14th birthday. My name's Naomi. I live in a quiet middle-class neighborhood just outside Ashburn, Virginia, with my mom and my older sister Ivy, or what used to feel like my sister. My dad walked out when I was 5, so it had always been the three of us. Ivy was a year and a half older than me, supposed to be turning 16 that October. From the start, she and I were never the kind of siblings who laughed together or shared secrets. Ivy was different, complicated in ways I couldn't explain. When I was little, she'd decapitate my Barbie dolls and stash their plastic heads in the freezer like trophies. One time, when I was 7, she shoved me down the staircase just because I wouldn't let her borrow my glitter markers. My wrist snapped under me when I hit the floor. When Mom asked what happened, Ivy swore I tripped, her voice steady, eyes wide with false innocence. "She's just playing, Naomi," Mom always said, brushing my tears away like it was nothing. "That's what sisters do. Don't take it so seriously. She doesn't mean it." But I knew she did. I saw it in the way Ivy smiled when I cried, slow and satisfied. Her eyes lighting up like pain was her private joke. At dinner, she'd go silent for minutes at a time, staring at the wall as if she were tuned into some hidden frequency only she could hear. Sometimes I'd wake up with my hair uneven, hacked off in clumps, or find my shoes filled with dirt like someone had been burying them. When I accused her, she'd shrug lazily and mutter, "House settling, or maybe I sleepwalk, who knows." By the time we both hit our teens, things cooled off, or maybe I just learned to disappear, to drift around her without making contact. The pranks, if you could call them that, stopped. We hardly spoke. It was like we lived in two different houses even though we shared a bathroom. For the first time in years, I actually began to feel safe. That lasted until 3 weeks before my birthday. It started with humming. Just this low, tuneless drone like a half-remembered lullaby. At first I thought it was coming from her room at night. Then I heard it everywhere. The hall, the kitchen, even the bathroom at 3 a.m. when I got up to pee. That same sound, crawling under my skin. One morning I couldn't take it anymore. "Why do you hum that creepy tune all the time?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my voice cracked. She looked at me for a long moment before grinning, wide and sharp. "Because it keeps the voices quiet." I laughed nervously, waiting for her to smirk and roll her eyes, but she just kept staring. Her smile didn't touch her eyes. It never did. The night before my birthday, I passed by her room. The door was cracked, and inside she sat cross-legged on her bed, staring at the wall. A single candle flickered on her desk, casting her face in shifting shadows. I hesitated. "You good?" I asked softly. Her head turned slow, too slow, like it weighed more than her neck could hold. "You'll like what I got you," she said, voice flat but deliberate. "It's something really special." I didn't know what to say, so I nodded and backed down the hall, every hair on my neck prickling. The next morning, my birthday, I opened my door and nearly jumped. Ivy was standing in the hallway, dripping wet, her hair plastered to her cheeks as though she'd just climbed out of a lake. It was barely 6:30 a.m. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, her hands hidden behind her back. "Happy birthday," she said almost sweetly. I hesitated. "Thanks." She pulled out a small, crudely wrapped box, covered in shiny black paper. My stomach turned as I unwrapped it. Inside was a lock of my own hair, tied neatly with a red ribbon. "What the hell, Ivy?" My voice cracked. She giggled, high-pitched and unsteady. "I cut it while you were sleeping. You didn't even wake up." The box slipped from my hands. My heart hammered against my ribs. "I'm telling Mom," I snapped, spinning toward the stairs. Her hand shot out, cold and iron-tight around my wrist. Her skin was so icy it burned. She leaned close, her lips brushing my ear. "You don't have to tell her," she whispered. "She wouldn't believe you anyway." Then, as if nothing had happened, she let me go and skipped away down the hall, humming that dreadful tune. That night, I locked my door for the first time in years. I lay in bed, every creak and sigh of the house sharp as gunfire in the dark. My eyes flicked from ceiling to corner to closet, desperate to track shadows that seemed to shift when I wasn't looking. Sleep finally dragged me under after 2 in the morning. When I woke, she was standing over me, inches away. Her face hovered above mine, pale and rigid. She wasn't blinking. Her lips peeled back into a crooked, unnatural grin, wider than it should have been, as though she'd been smiling like that for hours. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, like she wasn't even seeing me, just staring through me. My chest tightened. I screamed, the sound ripping out of me raw and frantic, but she didn't move, not even a blink. My panic boiled over and I slapped her across the cheek. The sound was sharp in the stillness. She didn't flinch. Instead, her head tilted slowly, bird-like, her grin stretching wider as though she'd been waiting for me to do that. "No," I whispered, stumbling out of bed. I bolted to the door, yanked it open, and nearly crashed into my mom, who was walking down the hallway in her robe. Her face twisted in confusion. "What's going on?" she asked, eyes darting past me toward my room. She was here," I stammered. My voice shook, half-choked on breath. "Ivy, she was watching me sleep." My mom's expression froze, her features tightening as if someone had turned her to stone. "Naomi," she said carefully, her voice trembling. "What are you talking about?" "Ivy, she was just here, I turned back into the room, my words cutting off. The room was empty, completely still. The shadows hung quiet in the corners. The air itself felt colder, sharper, like it burned my lungs when I breathed. My mom looked at me, long and searching, before finally placing her hand gently on my shoulder. Her touch was warm, grounding, but her eyes were wet with something I didn't understand. "Naomi, Ivy died 2 years ago." Her words gutted me. My knees buckled and I dropped to the floor. "What?" She knelt beside me, her voice breaking. "We've talked about this, baby, don't you remember? The fire, at Aunt Lorna's house." I shook my head violently. No, she's alive. I saw her just now. She gave me a box this morning, with my hair. She's been..." Mom's face crumbled. Her eyes filled with a sorrow so deep it made my stomach twist. "Sweetheart, you've been under so much stress. Ivy's gone. She's been gone. That winter break, we buried her." She took a deep breath that rattled. "You even gave a speech." But none of that lived in my memory. What I remembered was her laugh, the way her shampoo smelled like eucalyptus, the way she hummed that awful tune. I remembered her voice, her pranks, her grin. Last night. I ran to Ivy's room. I don't even know why. Some desperate instinct. But when I opened the door, it was bare. Empty shelves, bare walls, dust on the floor. It didn't even smell like her. It hadn't been lived in for years. That night, I didn't sleep. I dug the black box out of the trash, my hands shaking. It was still there, the lock of hair bound with that red ribbon. When I held it close, I swore I heard the faintest hum, soft against my ear. I didn't tell Mom. She already thought I was breaking apart. The next few days were worse. I heard Ivy's voice everywhere, in the shower, under my bed, inside my closet. Sometimes I felt a tug at my shirt, cold breath brushing against the back of my neck. Once my phone glitched and played a video I didn't remember recording. Ivy's face filled the screen. She smiled, leaned close, and whispered, "Don't forget me." I started researching, obsessively. Ghosts, hauntings, trauma, hallucinations, psychosis. I even snuck to the library, flipping through dusty books and old articles. The more I read, the more it chilled me. Spirits are strongest on anniversaries. And trauma. Trauma can block memories you don't want to face. In the storage closet, I found Mom's old scrapbook. Inside, tucked between yellowed pages, was Ivy's obituary. Ivy Laura Bellamy, age 13, died in a house fire. No foul play suspected. My head throbbed. My breath caught. I flipped through more pages, trembling, until I found a photograph of the funeral. There I was, standing by the casket, a doll in my hand, my face blotched from crying. I had no memory of it. None. Why couldn't I remember? The next week nearly destroyed me. The humming never stopped. It grew louder, closer. One night I woke to find the word "remember" carved into my closet door, jagged and deep. My shoes were soaked with water. My hair was shorter again. Every time I looked in the mirror, I swore I saw her reflection beside mine, grinning. And then came the dreams. I spoke to her in them, whispering into mirrors that pulsed with shadows. "Why are you doing this?" I asked once, my throat raw with tears. Her voice came back, soft but sharp as glass. "Because you let me die." The memories slammed back in fragments. That night at Aunt Lorna's, playing hide-and-seek in the attic, the flicker of matches, Ivy giggling as she struck them, me begging her to stop, the curtains catching fire, smoke choking the air, her face disappearing in the blaze, her scream, my name, just before the ceiling collapsed. I ran. I never told anyone that. Mom always said it was an accident, that Ivy got trapped upstairs, that it wasn't my fault. But Ivy's voice said otherwise. The last time I saw her, it was midnight. I woke to find her sitting on the edge of my bed, her humming louder than it had ever been. Her voice was almost gentle. "I was just playing." Tears streamed down my face. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to leave you." Her head tilted, eyes softening for the first time. "I know." And then she was gone. That was 6 months ago. Her room is still empty, but the word "remember" is still carved into my closet door. Sometimes I wake to that same humming vibrating through the walls, and every year, the week of my birthday, I feel her there, watching, waiting, just playing. I never put much stock in signs from the afterlife. Ghost stories, dreams, voices in the night. It all sounded like something people invented to comfort themselves. When others spoke about hearing a loved one's voice moments before learning they had passed, I used to laugh, quietly at least. My family was never one for superstition. We didn't have rituals or talismans, no whispered warnings about omens. We were grounded people, practical, almost stubbornly so. Or at least, that's what I believed. I should probably go back to the beginning before everything unraveled. My name is Lena Mercer, and I grew up in a quiet little town just outside Ashland, Oregon. The place wasn't remarkable. Rows of simple neighborhoods, thick pine trees clutching the roadsides, and streets where every dog had a name everyone knew. It had that cozy, small-town rhythm where gossip traveled faster than the mail. Our house was a 2-story with peeling white paint and a porch that creaked no matter how lightly you stepped. Inside it was me, my parents, and my older sister, Elena. She was 2 years older, 17 to my 15 that spring of 2016. Elena wasn't flawless, but she was the kind of person whose kindness felt effortless. When we were kids and my nightmares woke me in the dark, she'd crawl into bed beside me and sing until I drifted back to sleep. Even when she got older and her weekends filled up with friends and trips, she never forgot me. She always made space for me, like I was stitched into her plans whether I realized it or not. That spring, she was headed out for a weekend trip, her best friend, Maddie's birthday. They were staying overnight in a cabin, the kind of teenage getaway I envied, but wasn't old enough to join. My parents were bound for Eugene, a surprise 50th birthday party for my uncle. The idea of spending the night trapped in a living room of relatives dodging questions about school and college dreams sounded unbearable. I begged to stay home, insisting I was old enough. After some back and forth, they agreed. I felt like I'd won a battle. That Saturday night, I relished the solitude. I made instant noodles, curled up with a blanket on the couch, and queued up a corny horror flick on Netflix. The house was still and familiar, the kind of silence that felt safe rather than lonely. Outside, the spring air carried a damp chill, slipping under sleeves and curling around ankles. But inside was warm. I felt cocooned. By 11:30, sleep was dragging me under. I rinsed my bowl, checked the locks, and trudged upstairs. My bedroom faced the backyard where towering pines reached toward the sky, their shadows bent beneath the distant glow of a street lamp. I always left my curtains half drawn, enough to see but not enough to feel exposed. I don't know how long I'd been asleep before I felt it, fingers brushing through my hair, gentle, rhythmic strokes against my scalp. At first, I thought I was dreaming. Then came the humming, low and familiar, a lullaby. My lullaby. The one Elena used to sing. Elena, I mumbled, eyes sticky with sleep. No reply. I shifted and blinked awake. Someone was sitting on the edge of my bed. The outline was unmistakable, her long, dark hair spilling forward, her favorite oversized hoodie, the one she practically lived in. A strange knot formed in my stomach. When'd you get back? My voice was groggy, uncertain. Wasn't your trip tomorrow night? She didn't answer, just kept humming, softer this time. Her hand grazed my forehead, tender, almost motherly. Elena? I tried again, sharper now. Seriously, you're creeping me out. Still silence. Then she leaned down, her face so close I could almost feel her breath. Her mouth moved, whispering words that felt heavy enough to freeze the room. I'll miss you, Lena. A jolt of panic surged through me, but my body refused to obey. My arms, my legs, everything locked tight, as if I were pinned to the mattress. The air thickened, my pulse hammering in my throat. She stood slowly, unnaturally. I could only watch as her shadow slipped across the room and disappeared through the door. The humming trailed down the hallway until the house fell silent again. For what felt like forever, I stayed rigid, staring at the ceiling while my heart pounded so hard it hurt. Eventually, my limbs thawed, heavy and trembling. I forced myself to sit up, flipped on the lamp. The room was empty, painfully normal. I pushed out into the hallway and crept into Elena's room. Her bed was neat, untouched, her bag still waiting for the trip. The house was too quiet, too still. By morning, I woke with a pounding headache and the faint dread that clung to my skin like sweat. I told myself it was nothing more than sleep paralysis, a trick of a half-dreaming brain. But when I stumbled downstairs, I saw my mom's car already parked in the driveway. They weren't supposed to be home until noon. Inside, I heard a sound I had never heard from my father before. Broken sobs. He sat hunched at the kitchen table, his broad shoulders shaking, his head buried in his hands. My mother stood near the sink, her phone clutched so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Her face looked hollow, mascara smeared down her cheeks like black rivers. When her eyes found mine, her lips quivered as though she were fighting to form words she didn't want to say. Lena, she whispered, her voice trembling, fragile. There was an accident. The world seemed to still around me. She swallowed hard before forcing the words out. The car Elena was in, it hit black ice, just past the bend by the highway. It slid off the road into a pine. Her voice cracked, shattering. No one in the back seat survived. Her gaze faltered, as if speaking the words aloud condemned them as truth. Elena was in the back seat. They said she died instantly. I don't know how long I stood in the doorway. My body refused to move. My ears roared with a piercing ring that drowned out everything. The kitchen walls blurred, and the taste of bile coated my tongue. My knees gave out and I collapsed onto the cold tile, A sound tore from my throat, raw, animal, grief-stricken. But beneath the horror, one memory pulsed louder than anything. Her hand stroking my hair, her voice whispering, "I'll miss you." The days after the funeral smeared together. Food lost all taste. I barely ate. Sleep slipped from me, and every shadow in the house seemed alive. Floorboards creaking at night felt like Elena walking toward me. A faint draft against my ear carried her humming. I told no one what I had seen, what I had felt. Not my parents, not the grief counselor they insisted I see. How could I? How do you tell someone your dead sister came to you before the call? And the truth was, it hadn't comforted me. It had terrified me. Something was wrong that night. The way she moved, too slow, like each motion was dragged through water. The way her whisper felt far away, as though she was speaking across an endless void. Her presence had been love, yes, but also something uncanny, something not entirely human. I started digging, desperate for proof I wasn't unraveling. I didn't search ghosts. Instead, I typed, "visitations before death." Thousands of stories surfaced. A man swore he saw his brother at the foot of his bed, hours before the phone rang with the news. A mother described the scent of her daughter's perfume lingering in the air moments before the police arrived. Another woman insisted she felt her husband's breath on her cheek the instant he passed hundreds of miles away. The rational part of me wanted to dismiss it. Collective grief, coincidence, tricks of the brain. But the part of me that remembered Elena's icy touch, the sound of her lullaby in my room, that part couldn't ignore it. Years slid by. I moved away, went to college, then built a new life in a new city. But Elena was never far. A framed photo sat on my desk, her arms wrapped around me, both of us laughing on a beach during our last family trip. Sometimes at night I'd whisper to her softly, almost without realizing it, just in case she was listening. She never came again. Not for years. Until 9 years later. It was April 18th again. I hadn't noticed the date at first, caught up in the grind of work, errands, and bills. That morning, my mom called. She sounded calm, but I could hear the weight in her tone. Every year she lit a candle for Elena, and I promised I would too. That night, worn down, I fell asleep fully dressed, the lamp still burning faint light across my room. At 2:46 a.m., I woke to humming, her lullaby. I shot upright, my heart already racing. The room looked empty, but the air felt charged, dense as though it was holding its breath. Then my phone lit up on the nightstand, a missed call from Dad. My hands shook as I dialed him back. He answered on the second ring, his voice ragged with tears. "It's Grandpa," he said, breaking. "He passed about 15 minutes ago." I said nothing. I couldn't, because I knew. Elena had come again, not for herself this time, but to prepare me. I don't claim to understand it. I don't know what boundary lies between the living and the dead, or why Elena reached across it to touch me. Maybe it's all the mind grasping for meaning when grief is too sharp. Maybe it's trauma replaying itself with cruel precision. But maybe love outlasts everything. Maybe the bond between sisters, between family, doesn't end with dirt and stone. I rarely speak of that night. Most would dismiss it, or worse, pity me. But I write it here because someone might need to hear it. Not everything that comes to you in the night is meant to haunt. Some simply come to say goodbye. And some never really leave at all. I always thought having an older sister would be fun. Someone to look up to, someone to mimic, maybe even a built-in best friend. But with Elena, it was never that simple. She was 7 years older than me, already 18 when I was barely turning 11, and we couldn't have been more different if we tried. She carried herself with this strange calmness, always measured and deliberate, while I was noisy, endlessly curious, the kind of kid who asked questions long after everyone else had gotten tired of answering. In 2017, my parents bought a modest, semi-detached house on the quiet edges of Pune. It wasn't much, 2 bedrooms, pale yellow walls that looked brighter in the morning sun than at night, and wooden floors that squeaked no matter how lightly you stepped. The air inside always seemed to carry a faint trace of damp monsoon mixed with the lingering sweetness of incense sticks my mom lit in the mornings. Since Alina had just finished her board exams and I was still stuck in middle school, our parents decided we'd share a room until money allowed for either converting the attic or building an extension. Our room had a bunk bed. Alina chose the bottom bunk because she said it felt safe, like a little cave she could close herself into. I claimed the top bunk. It made me feel like I was in some spaceship cockpit hovering above everything else. The window near my bed faced the backyard where an old mango tree leaned toward the house. When the wind picked up, its branches scraped across the glass with an eerie screech, like fingernails dragging slowly down a chalkboard. The first few weeks in the new house seemed normal enough. Alina and I kept to ourselves. She was always hunched over her laptop with headphones on, either typing furiously or staring at the screen, totally absorbed. I wasted hours on my dad's old tablet until bedtime. Our conversations never went much deeper than the usual sibling arguments about noise or space. But there was one thing about Alina that never sat right with me. She never smiled in photographs. Not as a child, not during her teenage years, not ever. No silly grins, no awkward braces smile, nothing. Every single picture showed the same flat, emotionless face, as if she'd been told to keep whatever she was feeling hidden away. Once I asked Mom about it. She didn't even look up from her cooking when she said, "That's just how she is. Some kids don't smile much. It's normal." Her answer was casual, dismissive, but the image stayed in my mind. Things shifted the night after our open house. My parents had hosted it for my dad's side of the family. Aunts, uncles, and cousins I barely knew crammed into the house, filling every corner with chatter, laughter, and the shrieking chaos of kids running wild. It felt like the walls themselves were vibrating until, finally, everyone trickled out around midnight. I should have been exhausted, but I was buzzing from the Coca-Cola and the 2 cupcakes I'd stolen before anyone noticed. Alina, claiming a headache, had slipped off to bed right after the guests left. I stayed in the living room, back propped against the wall, tablet glowing in my hands, as I played games in the sudden quiet. The silence that followed such a loud day felt strange, like the house was holding its breath, waiting. Around 2:15 a.m., I finally peeled myself off the floor and crept toward our room. The house seemed heavier, every creak of the wooden planks echoing louder than it should. I climbed up to my bunk as carefully as I could, stretched out on my back, and stared at the ceiling fan turning lazily overhead. The streetlight outside cut sharp lines of gold through the blinds, painting shifting shapes on the ceiling as the fan blades rotated. My eyes grew heavy, lulled by the rhythm. That's when the nightmare came. In the dream, I stood in the hallway right outside our room. The strip of light under the door glowed, and from inside came the unmistakable sound of whispering. My skin prickled. My hands shook as I pushed the door open. Alina was there, cross-legged on her bed, her back to me at first, long black hair spilling over her shoulders as she stared at the wall. Slowly, she turned her head. Her eyes were wrong, completely white, empty, no pupils, no humanity. And then she smiled. Not a normal smile, but something grotesque, stretched wide and forced, her mouth pulling too far across her face, like the skin might rip. She leaned forward, lips moving. A faint whisper crawled out, words I couldn't understand. I tried to step back, to run, but my legs refused to obey. My body was frozen, locked in place. My chest tightened as though invisible hands were pressing me down. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. My throat produced only silence. That's when the realization slammed into me. I wasn't just dreaming. This was sleep paralysis. I could feel myself lying rigid on the top bunk. My eyes were glued shut, my heart pounding in my ears. The fan's hum, the faint whir of an auto rickshaw outside, the scratching of the mango tree on the glass, all of it bled into the moment. I was conscious, trapped in my own body, unable to move, unable to cry out. And then, something touched me. A hand, warm and soft, closing gently around mine. A voice, low and concerned, whispered right by my ear. "Hey, you okay?" My eyes snapped open. Alina was there, standing right beside my bunk, her hand wrapped gently around mine. Her expression wasn't the one from my nightmare. It was soft, concerned. "You okay?" she asked quietly. My throat felt raw. I sat up slowly, breath coming out in broken gasps. "Yeah, I just had a nightmare." She gave a small nod, almost dismissive, like she'd heard it all before. "Go get some water, you'll feel better." I climbed down the ladder, legs trembling as though they might give out beneath me. The wooden floor felt icy against my bare feet. I walked toward the hallway, still trying to shake off the weight pressing on my chest. But as I turned back, something stopped me cold. Alina was still there, standing in the doorway. Except now, she was smiling. Not kindly, not reassuringly, but with the same stretched, unnatural grin from my dream. Wide, unblinking, teeth bared in a way that made my stomach churn. I blinked hard, rubbed my eyes. When I looked again, her face was neutral, expressionless, like nothing had happened. My heart wouldn't slow down. Maybe I was still groggy. Maybe my brain was playing tricks. That had to be it. The kitchen was pitch dark except for the faint green glow of the microwave clock. I poured water from the steel jug, hands shaking so badly I nearly spilled it. I gulped it all down in one go, hoping the cold would ground me. But the air felt wrong, chillier than it should have been, like someone had opened a window I couldn't see. That's when I noticed it. The refrigerator door, slightly ajar. A shadowed figure crouched in front of it. My stomach dropped. I froze, clutching the glass. "Who's—" I started, but the words died in my throat. Because it was Alina. She was kneeling barefoot, her gray hoodie pooling around her like it had earlier in the night. Her hair hung in front of her face as she rummaged through the lower shelf. Then she looked up at me, put a finger to her lips, and whispered, "Shh. You'll wake them. I'm making noodles. Want some?" The glass almost slipped from my hand. "What?" My voice cracked. "How long have you been here?" She tilted her head slightly, like she was amused by the question. "About 20-30 minutes. I'm trying to find the green chilies Mom bought yesterday." The words stuck in my throat. My mouth went dry. "You've been here the whole time?" Her eyebrows knitted together. "Yeah. Why?" I didn't answer. I couldn't. My mind was spinning, replaying the image of her standing in the doorway, holding my hand, smiling that inhuman smile. Who had woken me up? I backed away slowly, muttering something that probably sounded like nothing, though it barely made sense even to me. Then I turned, retreating to the living room as quietly as I could. I didn't sleep in our room that night. I curled up on the couch, blanket pulled up to my chin, every light in the house blazing. My body was rigid, but my mind kept circling back to that smile. The next morning, I faked a stomach ache so I wouldn't have to go to school. I didn't want to see her, not after that. But strangely, Alina acted completely normal. She even brought me a steaming bowl of soup, asking in that same calm, distant voice how I was feeling, like nothing unusual had happened. I didn't tell anyone, not Mom, not Dad, and definitely not Alina. But after that night, things started happening. Little things at first. Sometimes I'd catch her standing in a corner of the room, whispering to herself, lips moving quickly like she was having a conversation no one else could hear. Once, when I was searching her wardrobe for a comb, I found a small leather-bound journal tucked beneath her sweaters. The pages were filled with strange, looping script I couldn't read, like a language that wasn't meant for me. And then there were moments in public, in plain sight, that made my skin crawl, like during a family dinner, when my cousin cracked a joke that had everyone laughing, everyone except Alina. She just stared at him, her face blank except for that same wide, silent smile. Eventually, I refused to sleep in our room. At first, I made excuses. Too many mosquitoes. The mattress was uncomfortable. It was too cold. But finally, I told my mom I was having nightmares and wanted to sleep with them. She didn't argue, and from then on I avoided that room after dark. If I had to go inside, it was only during daylight, never alone. 7 years passed. I'm 18 now. We live in another city, and I have a room of my own. Alina moved to Bangalore for college and only comes back rarely. By all accounts, life should have moved on. But sometimes, when I'm scrolling through old photos or brushing my hair in the mirror, I think about that night, about the hand that wasn't hers, the smile that stretched too far, the way her face flicked between human and something else. And I wonder, what if it wasn't just sleep paralysis? What if something else was wearing her face that night? Because 2 weeks ago, during a video call with Alina, my internet glitched. The screen froze. Not entirely, just her face. Except, her smile kept moving. It kept stretching, wider and wider, while everything else stayed still. And then the screen went black. I haven't called her since. She hasn't messaged either. And last night, as I lay in bed half asleep, I swear I felt a hand wrap around mine. Warm, soft, familiar. A voice whispered right in my ear, "Hey, you okay?" I always knew something was wrong with my sister. Not in a loud, chaotic way that would have drawn attention. She didn't throw fits in public, didn't smash things, didn't set fires. Her wrongness was quiet, careful, and deliberate. It was the kind of wrong that hides in the background until one day you realize it's been there all along, watching you. Her name was Emily. We were close in age. She was 9, I was 8, when it began. That was the summer our family moved into the pale yellow 2-story house on a cul-de-sac in suburban New Jersey. The house looked like it belonged on a postcard. White trim, a bright red front door, a manicured lawn. The attic smelled of dust and things forgotten, like old cardboard and moth-eaten clothes. My parents were thrilled. This was their first home after years of renting. Their proof that all the overtime and double shifts had finally paid off. For me, though, the house felt wrong, like the walls had been waiting for us. We moved in just before school started. The air was thick with late summer heat. The sidewalk still hot enough to burn bare feet. Neighborhood kids sprinted past in flip-flops, shrieking with laughter, chasing each other with neon water guns. Emily and I were given the bedroom at the end of the hallway upstairs, right beside the attic door. My bed went under the window on the left. Hers was tucked against the wall by the closet. The first week felt normal enough. New school, new routines. Both our parents worked long hours. Dad with a construction crew, Mom at the clinic. So most afternoons it was just Emily and me. We'd come home, throw pizza rolls in the microwave, and do our homework at the little desk by the window. We were together, but slowly she started drifting into something else. It began with the door. Emily started locking our bedroom door from the inside. Always in the afternoon, always without explanation. She'd slip in alone and tell me to wait outside. When I knocked, she'd snap, "Go away, Lily, I'm busy." At first I thought she was just being a brat, but curiosity got the better of me. I'd lean against the wood, press my ear to the cool paint, and that's when I heard it. Low voices. Not hers alone. Whispers that gurgled and dragged like someone trying to talk underwater. Sometimes there were 2 voices, sometimes 3. I'd knock louder, heart pounding. "Who are you talking to?" Every single time her answer was the same. "No one." When she finally opened the door, her appearance unsettled me. Her hair was mussed like invisible hands had been tugging at it. Her eyes were glassy, unfocused, as if she'd just woken up from a heavy dream. And there was a smell, faint but foul, mildew, wet earth, the rot of something dragged from the ground. I told our parents. They smiled, brushed it off. "She's creative," Mom said warmly. "She's probably just pretending, making up stories. Maybe she'll be a writer one day." Dad chuckled, agreeing, but I wasn't laughing. I knew what I heard. One night in September, I woke to the sound of Emily whispering again. It wasn't unusual. She had started mumbling in her sleep, but this time it sounded like a conversation. Her words were broken, uncertain. "Don't want to." "No, it's hers." I said no. Her voice shook, and then without warning she giggled. It wasn't her giggle. It was low, slow, and twisted in a way that made every inch of my skin crawl. I fumbled for my lamp and clicked it on. Emily. She was sitting upright in her bed, her face turned toward the closet. Her eyes were wide open. "What are you doing?" My voice trembled. Slowly, she turned her head toward me. Her face was blank, her movements mechanical. She blinked once, and then her lips curved into a smile. "He likes your hair." I stared at her. My throat tightened. "Who?" Emily didn't speak at first. She simply raised her hand and pointed at the closet, the man in the wall. I didn't sleep a second that night. By October, things had unraveled even more. Emily stopped eating properly. At dinner, she'd push food around her plate, muttering under her breath, sometimes letting out little laughs when no one had said anything. Other nights, she sat frozen, staring into nothing, her fingers twitching like she was counting something only she could see. Then I found the drawings. They were crumpled at the bottom of her backpack, pages torn from her notebook. Horrible, messy sketches that made my stomach turn. Stick figures hanging from trees. Shadowy creatures crawling out of air vents. Girls with huge eyes and mouths stitched shut. I didn't show Mom and Dad. Not that it mattered. They wouldn't have believed me anyway. In every single drawing, there was always a door. And behind that door, lurking in the scribbled shadows, was a faceless black figure. The sight of it turned my stomach. I couldn't keep it to myself anymore, so one evening I spread the crumpled papers across the kitchen table and showed them to Mom. She sighed, pinched the bridge of her nose. "She's going through a phase," she muttered, her voice carrying that forced patience adults use when they don't want to worry. Dad glanced at the sketches and grunted. "Tell her to knock it off. It's scaring your sister." That night, I stood in the hallway, my ear pressed against the door as they talked to Emily. I couldn't hear every word, but I'll never forget the way her voice cut through theirs, sharp and clear. He told me not to stop. Later, when the house was dark and quiet, Emily leaned toward me under the covers. Her breath was hot against my blanket as she whispered, "He doesn't like it when they yell." It was a Saturday when everything came to a head. Our parents had gone out for groceries, leaving Emily and me to clean our room. She barely spoke all morning, moving like a shadow around me. I was on my knees, fishing socks from under the bed, when I noticed the closet door was cracked open. Just a sliver, but enough to make my chest tighten. I had always hated that closet. The damp smell of old wood, like rain-soaked soil trapped in the walls. Against my better judgment, I stood and pulled it open. At first, it was just clothes. Then my eyes caught something on the back wall, a dark smear. I leaned in. It looked like handprints, small ones, pressed in something sticky. My stomach dropped. They were red. Blood. Before I could move, Emily shrieked. I spun around to find her standing on the bed, her face pale and wild, her finger jabbing toward me. "Don't go in there." He said not to. Confused, trembling, I stammered. "What are you talking about?" She dropped to the floor on all fours, scrambled toward me with unnatural speed, and slammed the closet door shut with both hands. Her voice was raw, almost not her own. "He said if you open it again, he'll take you instead." That night, the scratching began. Faint at first, like the tick of fingernails just beneath the wallpaper. It grew louder, scraping, dragging along the wood inside the walls. I cried and screamed until my parents came running. They turned on the lights, checked under the bed, opened the closet. Nothing. Emily just sat on her mattress, watching, lips curled in a secretive smile. When Mom asked if she'd heard it too, Emily finally spoke. He's quieter when he's happy. By November, Emily was barely recognizable as my sister. She stopped going to school altogether. She didn't talk to me, didn't talk to anyone. She just sat in the corner of our room, eyes locked on the wall, her lips moving in silent conversations with someone I couldn't see. I gave up and started sleeping downstairs on the couch. One night I woke to the sound of heavy, deliberate breathing right by my ear. I jerked upright, heart hammering. No one was there. But on the coffee table sat a piece of paper scribbled in crayon. "You're next." The handwriting was Emily's. I begged my parents. I screamed. I cried. I pleaded. "Please take her to a doctor, a therapist, someone." Dad shook his head, frustrated. "Kids go through weird phases. Don't fill her head with horror movies." Even when Emily smeared red streaks across the hallway walls, they brushed it off. "It's just paint," they insisted. But I knew. December 10th. I'll never forget that date. I came home from school and froze in the hallway. For the first time in weeks, our bedroom door was wide open. The air was colder inside, heavy. Emily wasn't there. But the closet gaped wide. I stepped closer. On the back wall was something new, a hole, crude, jagged, no bigger than a dog door. And around it the handprints, darker now, fresher, more detailed, like they were pressed again and again. Every part of me screamed to run, but I didn't. I knelt, my breath shallow, and crawled through. On the other side, there was only darkness. The stench hit me instantly. Rot, wet meat, something long dead and never buried. And then came the whispers. Dozens of voices overlapping. Some were high and childlike, others low, guttural, inhuman. Something cold and rough clamped around my ankle. I screamed, kicked, scrambled backward through the hole, landing hard in our room. I slammed the closet door shut, chest heaving. Emily was there, standing in the doorway, her face unreadable. She tilted her head slightly, her voice soft, almost tender. "He said you weren't ready yet. But soon." That night, my parents finally believed me. They had no choice, because Emily's screams woke the entire house. They found her in front of the closet, her body covered in scratches, her nails bloodied. Her eyes rolled back and she thrashed, chanting over and over, "Don't let him in, don't let him in, don't let him in." They rushed her to the hospital. She never came back. Now, the house is quiet. Too quiet. My parents nailed the closet shut, locked the bedroom, and banned me from even mentioning her name. Emily is in a psychiatric facility 3 towns over. I'm not allowed to visit. They say it's better that way. But some nights, the scratching returns. Soft, deliberate. Sometimes I wake to find crayon notes slipped under my door. He still remembers. "You're next." And on the worst nights, when the hallway is dark and silent, I see her. Emily, standing just beyond my door, smiling, whispering. "He chose me first, but he likes you more." I never liked going to bed with wet hair. My sister Liana always said the same thing, though she said it with a grin that never quite reached her eyes. It sounded like a joke, but I could tell she meant it. Liana was 2 years older than me, the kind of person people couldn't help but notice, graceful without trying, her long black hair shimmering whenever sunlight touched it, flowing down her back like silk. Everyone compared us. "She looks like a movie star," they'd say, glancing at me like I was her plain shadow, the quiet, bookish one. But I never resented it. She was my sister, and I adored her. We grew up in Rivermore, a small, quiet town wrapped between endless rice fields and forests that seemed to swallow sound. Our house was old, built from dark wood with cool cement floors that always felt damp in the summer. Outside Leanna's bedroom window stood a massive neem tree. Every year it became crowded with crows and blackbirds, their cries filling the air at odd hours. Sometimes in the thick of summer the noise was so piercing, so strange, that it sounded almost human. Our grandmother used to shake her head whenever she heard them. "Don't sit with your hair open near that window when they're nesting," she warned. "Those aren't just birds, not always." We laughed, of course. What child listens to ghost stories from the old village? Looking back, I wish we had. It was the summer of 2011, the summer everything changed. Leanna was 17, I was 15. The heat that year was unbearable, thick, suffocating, the kind that made your skin feel too tight. Our parents had gone to Kolkata to visit an aunt in the hospital, leaving the two of us at home with our cousin Dash and his friend Ryu, who were staying with us during their college break. At first, that week felt like freedom. Lazy afternoons, silly board games, cheap horror movies late at night. Leanna, ever the dramatic one, liked to sit by the window for meals, claiming it was the only place in the house with a breeze. One afternoon during lunch, she noticed a crow perched on the windowsill. Not unusual for our house, but this one didn't move. It just sat there, watching her. Leanna flicked a bit of rice toward it. The bird didn't eat. It just stared. "It's like it knows me," she said with a laugh that sounded a little too forced. From then on, it came back every day. Same hour, same stillness, same stare. By the third day, she started leaving it a plate. Rice, a piece of meat, even some vegetables. "She's got a pet crow now," Dash joked, filming it on his phone. We all laughed, but that night Leanna barely touched her own food. She said she wasn't hungry, but her eyes looked distant, unfocused. "You okay?" I asked quietly. She didn't answer right away. Then, almost like she was afraid of her own voice, she whispered, "I can hear it calling." That was the first night I saw her sleepwalk. Around 2 in the morning, I was jolted awake by the sound of the refrigerator slamming and then glass shattering. I rushed to the kitchen and froze. Leanna was standing barefoot among broken bottles, the fridge door hanging wide open. She was chewing furiously, cramming cold rotis into her mouth like a starving animal. "Leanna." My voice shook as I stepped closer. "What are you doing?" She turned toward me, and I swear on everything I know, her eyes weren't hers. They weren't brown anymore. They were solid black, swallowing every bit of light. A guttural snarl tore out of her throat, deep and raw, before her body gave out and she collapsed onto the floor. The fever started the next day. It burned through her mercilessly, climbing to 104.8 degrees. She shook and mumbled constantly, delirious, spitting words none of us recognized in a language that didn't belong to her. At night, her body would jerk violently, and sometimes she would sit bolt upright in bed and scream without warning. We rushed her to the local doctor, who wiped his forehead in the stifling heat and said it was probably heat stroke, maybe some viral infection. He handed us paracetamol, fluids, and instructions to keep her cool. But no matter what we did, she only got worse. She stopped eating during the day. Plates sat untouched in front of her, food growing cold while she just stared past us. But at night it was different. She tore through the kitchen like something starving. We tried locking the fridge, but she broke the lock like it was nothing. One night, Desh finally tried to stop her. He grabbed her arm as she shoved food into her mouth. "Enough, Leanna, you need help," he shouted. Without even looking at him, she flung him across the room as if he were a rag doll. His body slammed into the wall with a sickening thud. The silence afterward was heavier than the heat. "I'm telling you, that's not your sister," Ryu whispered to me later that night, his face pale in the glow of the hallway bulb. His voice trembled. "Something's wrong with her." I wanted to argue, but I couldn't. He was right. I just didn't know what to do. When Mom came back from Kolkata and saw Leanna, she screamed. It wasn't her pale face or thin frame that made her shriek. It was the way Liana moved. She was crawling on all fours backwards, her limbs bent at angles no body should allow. Her head tilted unnaturally as she hissed, "I want to go home." The words came doubled, as if another voice echoed underneath hers, something not human. We brought her to specialists. A neurologist studied her scans. Nothing. Blood tests. Clean. No infection, no tumor, no explanation. That's when desperation led us to the church. Father Sampson came. He wasn't dramatic like the exorcists you see in films. He was calm, methodical, even skeptical at first. But the moment he placed his hand on Liana's forehead and began to whisper a prayer, she laughed. No, not laughed. She roared, her head snapping back violently. And then a voice, ancient and harsh, erupted from her throat. 7. There are 7 of us. She fed us. She called us. She belongs to us now. The priest froze. His voice faltered when he asked, "Why her?" The answer came as a chorus, layered and echoing. She opened her hair. She opened her window. She opened herself. Father Sampson staggered back, crossing himself quickly. The cleansing began that night. Days bled into nights filled with prayer, chants, the sharp burn of incense, lines of salt drawn again and again, and blood. Always blood, from her bitten lips, from the scratches on her own arms as she writhed. Liana screamed until her throat gave out, the sound like her soul was being ripped apart. Mom wept until she collapsed in exhaustion, but I never left her side. I sat there holding her trembling hand, feeling her bones twitch under my fingers as though something inside her was trying to claw its way free. On the final night, the prayer ended abruptly with a sound that haunts me still. The shrieks of crows outside the window, thousands of them, all at once, as if they were dying. And then silence. A silence so complete it made the walls hum. When it was over, Father Sampson placed a silver chain around Liana's neck. A small pendant dangled from it, etched with symbols older than anything I could read. "She must wear this always," he said firmly. "Never take it off. If she does, they will come back. And next time, they will not leave." For a while, things calmed. Liana returned to school, but she was changed. The light in her eyes never came back. She grew quieter, always distracted, staring out windows as though waiting for something. And the strangest part, no birds came back to the neem tree. Not one. Years passed. In 2018, she married a kind man named Rohit. They tried for children. The first pregnancy ended in miscarriage at 5 months. The doctors couldn't explain why. The fetus had simply stopped growing. The second time, the same thing. The third, in 2023, ended with emergency surgery. She nearly died. After that, she gave up. They adopted a little girl last year. Liana loves her fiercely, almost desperately. But when I visit, I still notice things. The way she brushes her daughter's hair slowly, carefully, whispering under her breath as if reciting something only she can hear. The way her eyes glaze over sometimes, drifting toward dark corners of the room. And the pendant, the one Father Sampson gave her, it's gone. "I lost it on our last trip," she told me casually, smiling when I begged her to see the priest again. "Don't worry, they wouldn't hurt a mother." But I do worry, because at night, I've begun to hear crows again. Not outside the window, not yet, but far away, getting closer. And last week, her daughter woke up screaming. She said, "Mama was flying in the room, her hair was floating, and there were birds in the dark." I sleep with my lights on now, and I never, ever leave my window open, not with my hair down. Because I remember what Liana whispered to me after her first miscarriage, her voice breaking, barely audible. They said I'll never be a mother, that if I try, they'll take it. And she was right. Some things never let go. I was 13 when my family moved to a remote village called San Rafael del Norte. hidden deep in the Visayan region of the Philippines. Before that, we'd lived in Bayalid City, always noisy, crowded, traffic horns blaring from dawn until past midnight. It wasn't paradise, but it was alive. After my dad died in an accident, though, my mom wanted to escape. She wanted peace, or maybe just the illusion of it. To be honest, I think money was the bigger reason. Rent and food were cheaper in the mountains, so she found us a house that was far from everything. No Wi-Fi, hardly any phone signal, and neighbors so distant that if you screamed, it would vanish into the hills before reaching another soul. It was just the three of us then. My mom, my older sister Marielle, and me. I'm Isa. My mom liked to remind us that we were lucky to have each other, especially now that Dad was gone. But the truth? Marielle and I were never the type of sisters who whispered secrets under the blanket. She was 16, withdrawn, always sketching in her pad, her headphones sealing her off from the world. After the move, she barely acknowledged me at all, except to mutter, "Knock before you come in," like her room was sacred territory. The house itself was old but livable, a weathered wooden two-bedroom with a rusting tin roof and floors that groaned under the weight of every step. The owner, a bent old man named Lo Mateo, lived in the only other house you could spot across the valley. During the handoff, he told my mom, "If you girls need anything, just shout loud. Sound travels fast in these hills." His voice carried a weight that made me think he'd seen things he wasn't saying. We settled in quickly enough. I enrolled in the barangay school, about a half-hour walk along dirt paths, while Marielle stayed home, finishing her lessons online with a prepaid data stick that barely worked. We didn't make friends, there weren't many kids around, and evenings felt endless. By dusk, shutters were closed, lamps dimmed, and we stayed inside, as if the darkness outside didn't want us wandering in it. The first strange thing happened in late August, almost quietly enough to dismiss. It was about 10:30 p.m. when I padded to the kitchen for a glass of water. As I passed Marielle's room, I heard her voice. Not unusual. Sometimes she called her friends, sometimes she binge-watched K-dramas, but this time her tone was off, slurred, like she was speaking through water. I pressed my ear against her door. "Marielle?" I whispered. There was a pause, a silence so heavy it pressed against me. Then her voice drifted out, calm, firm, but strange. "Don't open the door." I froze. "Go to sleep, Isa," she added softer. My heart pounded so hard it hurt. I didn't answer. I just stood there, staring at the old wood grain as if it would explain itself. After a moment, I backed away, my feet light on the creaking floorboards. The next morning at breakfast, nothing. She ate quietly, sketch pad open beside her plate. I asked carefully, "Are you okay?" She snapped her eyes at me like I'd interrupted something important. "Why wouldn't I be?" she said flatly, stabbing her spoon into the rice. I shut up. But that night marked a line I couldn't ignore. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday night, I stayed up late in the living room, the glow of our small TV spilling into the darkness. My mom had fallen asleep on the couch beside me, her breathing heavy. Marielle was in her room, as always. Around 1:20 a.m., without warning, the power cut out. The house dropped into pitch black. For a second, I didn't even breathe. Then my hand fumbled for the drawer, pulling out the flashlight. The beam flicked on, shaky, just as a sound scratched through the silence. Nails. Slow, deliberate scraping against wood. It came from Marielle's room. Then her voice followed, just barely audible. "Isa." I stiffened. "Isa, come here." It wasn't the voice she used at breakfast or when she told me to leave her alone. This was a whisper threaded with something else, fear, or maybe something pretending to be fear. My body moved before my brain caught up and I crept down the hall. Her whisper came again, urgent this time. "It's in here with me." My throat tightened. "What is?" I whispered back. Silence. "Marielle?" Nothing, until I pressed my ear against her door. That's when I heard it, her breathing, ragged, shaky, like someone crying into a pillow. My hand hovered over the knob. Then she screamed, "Don't open it!" I stumbled back. The flashlight flickered violently, shadows jerking across the walls. The scream jolted my mom awake. She staggered into the hall, rubbing her eyes. "What's happening?" I pointed at the door, my words tumbling over themselves. She said there's something in her room. She screamed. Mom grabbed the knob. It was locked. She pounded her fist against the wood. "Marielle, open this door right now." No answer. We stood frozen, every second dragging until finally the lock clicked. The door creaked open and Marielle stood there. Her face was drained of color, her hands trembling at her sides. "There was something by my window," she whispered. Her eyes darted past us to the dark corner of her room. It was watching me. We rushed inside. Her curtains were drawn tight, but when my mom yanked them open, the window latch dangled loose. The night air seeped in, cold and wrong. My mom grabbed the flashlight and leaned outside, sweeping the beam over the soil beneath the window. Nothing. No footprints, no signs of anyone passing. Just the rustling trees, whispering as if they knew something we didn't. That night we dragged pillows and blankets into the living room. We tried to sleep together, the three of us side by side. But rest never came easy. Every creak of the house made me flinch. Every gust of wind scraping against the tin roof sounded like fingers. The days that followed chipped away at my sister. Not suddenly, not in ways you'd notice unless you were watching her the way I was. Marielle's sketchpad filled with drawings that unsettled me. Thick forests pressed in darkness, windows with shadowy figures lurking behind them, people with faces left blank. The pages looked like they were draining her. She barely touched her food. Her eyes sagged with exhaustion, and when I asked, "Are you okay?" she would smile just enough to shut me up. But the smile never reached her eyes. Then came the voice. One night I crept from my room half asleep, needing to pee. As I passed the kitchen, I heard low murmurs, a hushed rhythm like someone coaxing a baby. I thought maybe Mom had woken up and was whispering to someone on the phone. But when I peeked around the corner, it wasn't Mom. It was Marielle. She stood in the middle of the kitchen, her back straight, her head tilted slightly toward the wall. Her lips moved softly, words too quiet for me to catch. The tone, though, that was clear, gentle, loving. The way Mom used to speak to Dad when she thought no one was listening. Marielle leaned closer to the wall, tilting her head like she was hearing something answer back. For a few seconds, she just listened. Then she turned, slowly. Her eyes locked on mine like she had known I was standing there the whole time. "Isa," she said softly, "you shouldn't be up." My stomach nodded. I wanted to argue, to ask who she was talking to, but her stare pinned me in place. I just nodded, stepping backward. "Go to bed," she added, her voice calm, almost soothing. I obeyed. Things slid downhill fast after that. Mom started to notice what I had been seeing. Some nights she would wake to find Marielle sitting cross-legged on the floor at 3 a.m., drawing furiously, whispering nonsense words under her breath. Other times she just stared at the paper, her hand unmoving, lips twitching as though she was listening for instructions. One afternoon, Mom tried to take her phone away, desperate to pull her out of whatever spiral she was in. Marielle snapped. She lunged, clawing at Mom's arm with such force that her nails broke skin. Blood welled up instantly. "I'm not done talking to her." Marielle snarled, her voice guttural, not her own. "Who?" I asked, heart hammering. Her gaze slid toward me, sharp and glassy. "The one who looks like you," she whispered. The breaking point came a week later. I jolted awake to screaming, not Marielle's but my mom's. I bolted into the hallway to find her frozen outside Marielle's door, her face ghost pale, her hand trembling against the frame. The door hung wide open. The room inside looked destroyed, papers scattered across the floor, dresser toppled, curtains shredded into strips. But Marielle was gone. We searched everywhere. Mom called Lo Mateo, then the neighbors, then the barangay captain. Lanterns swung through the darkness as people combed the area, but it was as if Marielle had dissolved into the night. Hours passed. Nothing. At sunrise, I stumbled into the backyard and froze. There she was, barefoot, caked in mud, standing motionless beneath the old mango tree. Her eyes were locked upward, wide and unblinking, like she was waiting for something in the branches to reveal itself. I touched her shoulder gently. She turned to me slowly, her face blank. "It's not done with me yet," she whispered. That was when Mom finally broke. At Lo Mateo's urging, she called for a mananambal, a local healer. He arrived that evening with herbs, smoke, and chants thick with a dialect older than my grandmother's prayers. The air in Marielle's room thickened with the bitter smell of burning leaves. After an hour of chanting, he looked at us grimly. "Something dark has attached itself to her," he said. "Something old. It came the night you heard the whispering. Spirits like this mimic voices. They make you trust them." Mom's hands shook as she clutched mine. "It might leave on its own," the healer warned. "Or it might not. If she listens again, if she lets it in deeper, it could take her soul for good." Almost 2 years have passed since that night. We stayed as long as we could, but after 6 months we finally scraped enough money to move back to Balo. Marielle is better now, mostly. She doesn't draw anymore. She hardly speaks, but she sleeps through the night, and for us that feels like a blessing. Still, there are moments that unsettle me. I'll catch her staring into the dark corners of her room, her head tilted as if listening for something I can't hear. And once, just once, I woke to the sound of her voice, soft and dreamy. "It's still here," she murmured in her sleep. Then her lips curved into a smile. I was 11 the first time I saw her. Not in a photograph, not in a dream or a bedtime story. Saw her. Really saw her. But if I just throw that at you, it won't make sense. It never made sense to me either, not until later. So I need to start at the beginning. My name is Lena Waller, and this happened in Lamont, Illinois in the fall of 2007. Mom and I had only just moved there a few months earlier, after her divorce from Dad. I didn't know much about why it happened back then. All I knew was that Dad wasn't coming back and Mom kept saying we were starting over. I hated those words. They sounded like the squeak of chalk being wiped off a board, cold, flat, leaving nothing behind but dust. The house we moved into was small. 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, a short, creaky hallway that always smelled like damp laundry and something burnt. Out back there was a tiny yard and a half-dead tree that scraped its branches against my bedroom window whenever the wind picked up. Mom spent most of her time in the sunroom that faced the yard. She smoked there, even though she promised she quit. She thought air freshener would trick me into believing her, but it never did. We weren't close, not really. She tried sometimes, but her body and her mind were rarely in the same place. Some nights she'd be gentle, quiet, sweet, making spaghetti with meatballs and watching cartoons beside me. Other nights she'd unravel, crying on the phone with voices I didn't recognize, slamming doors, yelling at shadows in her own head. I learned to tiptoe around her moods the way a cat picks its way across a narrow ledge. Silent, careful, praying not to fall. School was my safe place. I wasn't popular, not even close. Braces, oversized glasses, awkward in ways that felt carved into me. But I had books, and I had Tessa. Tessa was bold, funny, always wearing socks that didn't match. She used to say I looked like a haunted librarian, and somehow it felt like a compliment, like she saw me as something different but not less. Still, no matter how school went, walking home always pressed a weight down on me. The house wasn't frightening. It was heavy. Here's something important. I had an older sister. Her name was Maya, though I never met her. She died at birth, 2 years before I was born. When Mom said her name, it came out like sugar melting on her tongue, a word she wished could stay forever. When I was little, I asked questions. What color were Maya's eyes? Did she have hair? Was she bigger than me? At first, Mom answered, but eventually she stopped. She'd only whisper, "She's in a better place," and then pour herself another glass of wine. Growing up, I thought Maya was a ghost that haunted only Mom. But that changed one October night. It was a Thursday. I remember because Thursday nights were soup nights. I always made it for Mom, chicken noodle from a can, with extra carrots because she swore the orange color calmed her nerves. I'd been doing it every week since she got sick earlier that year. That night, the weather turned vicious. The wind howled like wolves in the dark, rattling the windows until they seemed about to break. Mom had been strange all day, her eyes distant, watery, like she wasn't fully here. She barely touched the grilled cheese I'd made her at lunch. When I asked if she was okay, she just muttered, "I'm fine, Lena, just tired." But it wasn't the kind of tired you could sleep off. She kept looking past me like she was waiting for someone else to walk into the room. By 10 o'clock, I went to bed. And that's when the real nightmare began. I woke standing, though I didn't remember getting up. I wasn't in my room anymore. I wasn't anywhere I knew. Instead, a damp, fog-covered forest stretched around me, a trail winding into darkness. The trees rose so high they swallowed the sky, leaving nothing but a suffocating blackness overhead. The air smelled of wet leaves and something faintly rotten. My chest tightened as I whispered, "Hello." Silence. Then, crunch. Footsteps behind me. I spun, my breath catching. A girl stood there, tall, too tall, wrong in the way her height stretched her body, easily 7 feet. Her skin was pale, waxy. Long brown hair clung in wet strands across her face, as though it had been soaked in oil. And in that moment I knew she was not a stranger. She was Maya. But her eyes, God, her eyes, they weren't monstrous at first. They were soft, brown, carrying a glint of sadness so familiar it hurt to look at. And then I saw it. A faint crescent-shaped birthmark on her left cheek. The one Mom always mentioned when she spoke about Maya, her lost child. My throat went dry. "Maya," I whispered. She smiled, though it wasn't a full smile. Crooked, uneasy, like she didn't know how anymore. "I missed you," she said. Her voice was delicate, like wind chimes caught in a storm. Fragile and beautiful, but wrong in the wrong weather. "Do you want to have a tea party?" I didn't understand why, but I nodded. Maybe it was the loneliness of our house, of my life. Maybe it was the warmth in her tone. Or maybe, deep down, I wanted what I'd never had. A sister. She turned and led me deeper into the woods, branches clawing at my arms as I followed. Eventually, we stepped into a small clearing. There, in the middle, sat a rusted iron table, surrounded by wilting flowers that drooped toward the mud. Broken chairs leaned at odd angles around it. On the table, 2 teacups rested neatly on cracked saucers. One of them steamed as though it had just been poured. "I made your favorite," she murmured. My hands shook as I sat down. She poured the tea, the liquid shimmering gold in the chipped cup. When I brought it to my lips, the smell hit me. Lemon and honey. The same tea my dad used to make before he left us. The taste wrapped around me like a blanket, warm and familiar, for a moment almost safe. Then Maya's voice shifted, dropping low, her smile fading. "I've been waiting," she said. "Watching." "Watching what?" I asked, trying to steady my voice. "You with her." My chest tightened. "You mean, Mom?" Maya didn't blink. Her lips twitched into a grimace. "She doesn't deserve you. She doesn't even see you. I should have lived, not you." The words froze me in place. "What?" "She let me die," Maya hissed. "She didn't fight for me. But she fought for you. She fed you, touched you, sang to you." Her face twisted in rage. "I hate her," she whispered, and then her gaze burned into me. "And I hate you for taking what was mine." I couldn't breathe. Her voice dropped even lower, rumbling, "Wrong. She's not well, Lena. Tomorrow is Friday. You'll make her soup like always, but she won't wake up. Not after that. A cold shiver cut down my spine. What do you mean? Maya leaned closer. Her eyes, once soft, were now bloodshot, veins spidering across them. Her breath stank of rot. She won't wake up unless I get to take your place. Let me in, Lena. Let me wear your skin. Just for a while. I shot up, the chair crashing backward into the mud. I have to go. Her body convulsed, jerking as if bones cracked beneath her skin. Her teeth lengthened into jagged points. Her limbs stretched until her fingers dragged in the dirt. You took my spot, she shrieked, her voice splitting into echoes. Give it back. I ran. Branches whipped across my face. My lungs screamed, but I didn't dare stop. Behind me, her snarls mixed with whispers, her voice crawling into my ears. I need her to die. She'll be mine again. Then everything went black. I woke up in my bed, tangled in blankets, chest heaving. My alarm clock glowed 5:15 a.m., my usual time to wake for school. I pressed my hand to my face, trying to convince myself it had been a dream, but it clung to me sticky and real. At school, I forced myself through math, through lunch, through the rhythm of an ordinary Thursday. But her voice echoed. Tomorrow is Friday. That evening, I did what I always did. I made soup, chicken, carrots, noodles. The smell filled the kitchen, normal, comforting. And then the phone rang. It was Dad. Where's your mother, Lena? His voice was sharp, urgent. She's in the sunroom, I said, trying to sound casual. She's just passed out on the floor. Silence. Then his voice tightened. Lena, go check on her, right now. I walked slowly down the hallway. Mom, I whispered. No response. She was curled on the floor of the sunroom, her skin pale, her lips cracked. A cigarette had burned down to the filter by her side. Mom. I nudged her shoulder. Nothing. Dad was still on the line. I'm sending your aunt and uncle. Pack your bag. They arrived minutes later, slamming through the door. My aunt screamed when she saw her. My uncle called 911. And then, without warning, Mom sat up. Her eyes snapped open, wild, shining, almost glowing. Her voice was a hiss. I'm not going. The room froze. The paramedics tried to calm her, but she fought with a strength that wasn't hers, teeth bared, body jerking. She looked inhuman. In the end, they left her there. But I was taken to my aunt's house. That night, Dad came for me. When we returned, we moved through the hallway like ghosts, careful not to wake her. She was asleep, peaceful, as if nothing had happened. The next morning, she was herself again. Smiling, humming, buttering toast. Normal. Almost. But I couldn't stop staring, waiting for the slip. And then I saw it. Just for a second. A flicker of red in her pupils. A shadow moving behind her smile. I never told anyone. Not Dad, not Tessa. But even now, sometimes in the fog, I hear Maya's voice calling me. And sometimes, late at night, my mother hums a lullaby she never sang to me before. The same lullaby Maya whispered about in the woods. I was 11 the year I started to believe my sister wasn't really my sister anymore. At first, I couldn't explain it. It wasn't anything obvious. It was a shift, a wrongness in the way she moved, the way she looked at us. It felt like someone else had slipped inside her skin. We had just moved to Carver, Illinois, about an hour outside Chicago. A small, quiet place where the streets all ended in cul-de-sacs and the houses looked like mirror images of each other. Vinyl siding, manicured lawns, chain-link fences. It was the kind of town that seemed perfectly safe from the outside, but when night fell, the silence pressed against the windows like a weight. Dad, Brian, had finally landed a warehouse manager job after nearly a year of unemployment, and the company even helped us relocate. Mom, Melissa, called it a blessing. She loved the double garage, the neat backyard, the old swing set that came with the house. She kept repeating the same thing. It's a fresh start, someplace peaceful. Dad was just glad to be working again. I tried to believe it too. For a while I almost did. But then Ava changed. She was 13, bookish, sharp, the type of sister who'd help with my math homework one day and call me annoying the next. We bickered like most siblings, but she had never scared me before. That changed during the second week in the new house. It was a Sunday. Rain hammered the roof, rattling the gutters, while I sat cross-legged on the living room carpet piecing together a Lego spaceship. Mom was in the kitchen, humming along to Fleetwood Mac while she chopped vegetables, and Dad knelt by the back door muttering curses at a stubborn hinge. Ava came down the stairs. She didn't say hi, didn't even smile. She just held out a sheet of paper. "Look what I made," she said, her voice flat. I took it. It was a drawing in black marker. 4 figures, too tall, too short. Us. But our eyes were nothing but empty ovals. "Why don't we have faces?" I asked. She tilted her head, her lips curling into a strange, deliberate smile. "It's just a drawing, Eli." Then without hesitation, she ripped it in half, let the pieces flutter to the carpet, and turned to walk back upstairs. I told Mom. She barely looked up from her knife. "She's a teenager. You'll understand when you're her age." "I'm 11, I muttered. She only smiled faintly, as if that explained everything. But it didn't. Something was wrong. At night I started hearing Ava whispering through the wall we shared. At first I thought she was sneaking phone calls, but Mom had confiscated her phone weeks before after catching her chatting with a college guy online. Still, the whispers came. Sometimes I heard giggling, other times a low, steady rhythm, like chanting in a language I didn't recognize. One night I told Dad. He trudged upstairs, knocked, and opened her door. She sat on the floor in the dark, eyes wide, hands limp in her lap. "No music, no whispering," she said before he even asked, her voice unnervingly calm. Dad glanced back at me and rolled his eyes. "You're dreaming, kiddo." But I wasn't. 3 weeks later, my parents hired a housekeeper named Yolanda. She was in her 50s, warm, with a southern drawl and a laugh that filled every corner of the house. I liked her immediately. Ava didn't. On her first day, Yolanda came down from the upstairs bathroom, frowning. "Something strange in there," she told Mom. "What do you mean?" "Little bundles wrapped in red thread under the sink. Look like dolls, smell like copper." Mom's face went pale. She hurried upstairs, checked herself, and came back down with tight lips. "Just toss them. Probably left behind by the previous tenants." Yolanda didn't argue, but her smile never returned. 2 days later, she quit. "No offense, ma'am," she told Mom at the door, "but there's something wrong in that house, especially that girl's room." We never got another housekeeper. That's when the accident started. Mom cut her hand badly slicing lemons. Dad slipped on the basement stairs and bruised his ribs so hard he could barely breathe. One night in the shower, the curtain rod came loose and crashed down on me, splitting my scalp open. And Ava was always nearby, watching. Too close. We brushed it off because what else could we do? But then Ava started getting hurt too. She came to breakfast one morning with 3 long scratches down her back, raw and red. "Where'd you get those?" Dad asked. "In my sleep, I guess," Ava murmured. That same day I found another drawing hidden behind her mirror. This time it was only our parents, lying in beds with thick red circles drawn over their faces. The worst night came 2 months in. I was lying in bed facing the wall when that crawling feeling started, the sense of being watched. I turned over and froze. There was a figure in the hallway, a girl with long black hair and a pale nightgown. Still, too still. My stomach flipped. It looked like Ava, but her mouth hung open in a silent scream, her eyes locked on mine. I screamed. The figure vanished. Mom and Dad rushed in, lights blazing. Ava was in her bed, sound asleep. "I saw her," I insisted, trembling, "in the hallway." Dad searched the house, every door locked, every window shut, alarm still armed. "You were dreaming," Mom said firmly, but I knew I wasn't. A week later, Ava stopped eating. She'd just sit at the table, pushing food around, staring at her reflection in windows, mirrors, even the microwave door. One morning, I found her in the bathroom, staring at herself. "You okay?" I asked. She turned slowly, her eyes flat. "She likes it when I'm quiet." "Who?" No answer. That night, the hallway mirror cracked from the inside as though something had punched it. 2 days later, I cornered her in the garage. "Tell me what's going on, Ava. What's wrong with you?" She didn't yell, didn't cry, just looked at me like I was too stupid to understand. "She asked me to," she whispered. "Who?" "She's under the house. She talks through the floor when it rains." I laughed nervously, but the sound caught in my throat. "That's insane." Ava leaned closer. "I made a trade, so we could stay here, so things would be okay. But she wants more now." "What did you give her?" I demanded. Her smile stretched, thin and eerie. "You'll see." 2 nights later, the kitchen caught fire. Flames spread unnaturally fast, swallowing the curtains, climbing the walls. Dad shouted it must have been the toaster, but it wasn't even plugged in. We escaped coughing, choking on smoke, except Ava. She didn't come out until the firefighters dragged her from the house. In her hands was that same drawing, 4 figures, 3 burning, 1 whole. Guess which one? We left Carver a week later. No explanations, no goodbyes. Ava was admitted to a psychiatric care facility after she tried to hurt herself. She kept whispering about the girl under the house, saying she hadn't finished what she started. The doctors said it was trauma, repressed emotions, imagination. I never believed them. It's been 7 years. We live in Milwaukee now, in a small apartment with fewer mirrors. I'm in college. I still sleep with a nightlight. Ava's still in care. Sometimes she speaks, but mostly she just stares. Last week I got a letter, no return address, just 4 words scrawled in jagged ink. "She hasn't forgotten you." And beneath it, a drawing. 2 figures, me, and something standing just behind me. I never really understood what was wrong with her. My name is Liam Carter. I was born in a small, forgettable town in Vermont, a place tucked between quiet valleys and mountains that always seemed too silent for their size. Our house sat on a lonely stretch of road with no sidewalks, only endless walls of pine trees and the restless sound of wind moving through their needles. My mom, Heather, always wanted a daughter. At least that's what my dad, Ben, used to tell me. According to him, she was devastated when I was born a boy. I don't remember any of that, of course. I was just a baby. But my first clear memory, the one burned into me like it never wanted to fade, is of her sitting on the porch. Evening was falling. The light split her face in half, warm amber on one side, shadows on the other. She was brushing the hair of a little girl I didn't know. "This is your new sister," she said softly, almost reverent. "Her name's Ia." I was barely 3. Ia had just turned 4. She'd been adopted from a foster home a few towns away. From what I was told later, there hadn't been any recorded abuse, no major trauma anyone could point to. But still, she was different. My mom said she had so much personality, and the way she looked at Ia, that glow in her eyes, I don't think she ever looked at me like that. I didn't feel jealous, not really. I just felt confused. Ia wasn't like me. I smiled at balloons. She stared at them until they popped. I'd run across the yard laughing. She'd stand still, watching me with those deliberate heavy blinks that made it seem like she wasn't just looking. She was studying. The first month, nothing seemed wrong. Life carried on like normal. Then the strange thing started. It began with my toys. Not just broken, but dismantled, like someone had taken them apart piece by piece. My stuffed dog was sliced open, the stitching peeled back like skin. all the cotton pulled out and arranged in a perfect circle around it. My building blocks were glued together in shapes that didn't make sense, twisted angles that made my stomach feel strange. My crayons melted into a single jagged lump of black. I couldn't explain it then, not at that age, but I knew it was Ia. She always drifted into my room when I wasn't there. Sometimes I'd catch her, like the time she held my baby blanket under her nose, breathing it in, her eyes shut, almost smiling. Another night, I woke up and saw her in the hallway. She was just standing there, holding one of the kitchen knives, not moving, not speaking, just watching. When I told my mom, she brushed it off. "She's sleepwalking, honey. Some kids do that. It's okay." But my dad wasn't so quick to dismiss it. One night he stayed up, standing guard outside my door. I didn't know about it until years later, when he finally told me that he'd seen her again. Same hallway, same knife, same stillness, like she was waiting for something. He never told my mom. He said later that if he did, she might have given Ia back, and he was afraid my mom was too fragile to survive that kind of loss again. By the time we were 8, Ia was stranger still, more distant, yet more unpredictable. At breakfast, she'd whisper to herself as she stirred her cereal round and round until it turned to mush. Sometimes I'd lean closer, trying to catch the words, but they never made sense. Just fragments, murmurs that felt like secrets she wasn't meant to share. She'd stare at the corners of rooms and laugh softly, like she saw someone standing there that the rest of us couldn't. I told Mom once, nervous, whispering it like a secret. "She's laughing at nothing, Mom, at nothing." Mom just smiled, rinsing a dish. "That's imagination, Liam. She's a creative child." But she wasn't creative. She was cruel. At night, she'd sneak into my room, not to smash things, just to move them. My favorite drawing, taped proudly to the wall, would be torn down and tossed in the trash. A single sock slipped under my pillow. My closet door left cracked open, no matter how tightly I shut it. Every night, something changed. And then came the scratching. One night, I woke to a strange noise. It was rough, steady, almost rhythmic. I followed it down the hallway and stopped at her open door. She was sitting cross-legged on the carpet, dragging her nails slowly across her arm. Not cutting, not breaking skin, just scratching. Over and over. Her eyes were wide, locked straight ahead, unblinking. And she was smiling. I screamed. My parents came running. By morning, she was gone. No explanations, just that E is going away for a while. I didn't ask questions. I just wanted quiet. For 3 years, I had it. Mom kept talking about Ia like she was at camp and would be home soon. Dad never said her name again. He drank more, worked later, like he didn't want to be in the same house. Then, on my 11th birthday, I came home to balloons, cake, and Ia. She stood beside Mom, taller now, hair longer, wearing a yellow dress. She smiled, actually smiled, as Mom beamed, surprise, and held her hand like nothing had ever happened. We had a small party. Ia even gave me a card, scrawled in shaky handwriting. "Happy birthday, Liam. I missed you. I'm better now." That night we played board games. She was quiet, polite, like a softened version of herself. I told myself maybe therapy had worked, maybe she really had changed. But at 1:46 a.m. I woke with a sharp sting on my arm. I blinked, and there she was, standing by my bed. A small pocket knife dangled in her hand. I looked down. A thin line of red marked my skin. Not deep, but enough to make my chest tighten. She grinned. "I want to know what's inside you," she whispered. Everything went black. I woke in a hospital bed, the smell of antiseptic heavy in the air. My mother sat beside me, crying quietly. "What happened?" I asked. "She's gone," was all she said. "Where?" I pressed. "She's gone, Liam, forever." We moved soon after. New town, new school, a house without memories of her. No one mentioned her name again. I healed, but the nightmares didn't stop. Always her. always the knife. By 15, I'd forced myself to bury her in my mind. Until the letter came. No return address. Just one sentence scrawled across a white page. "You never let me finish." I screamed when I read it. Dad said it was a prank. Mom didn't eat for 3 days. We changed the locks, installed cameras. Nothing ever showed up. 2 years later, in college, I found a folded note tucked inside my jacket pocket in my dorm closet. "You still bleed the same." I hadn't told anyone about Ia. Not my roommates, not my therapist. No one. Campus police shrugged. No prints, no footage. Probably a sick joke. But I knew. I moved again. Took a job at a quiet bookstore. One night, just before closing, a woman in a yellow dress walked in. She didn't say a word, just drifted through the aisles. When I finally tried to confront her, she was gone. On the floor, folded neatly, was the yellow dress. Inside it, a note. "You're all grown up now. I wonder what you look like inside." I haven't slept more than a few hours a night since. I see her in mirrors, in crowds. Once I swore I saw her reflection in a window when I wasn't even standing there. I changed my name, moved to Canada, tried to start fresh. But 2 nights ago, I woke with a stinging pain on my leg. 3 faint scratches. Not deep, not dangerous. Just enough to let me know she's still out there, still watching. And she isn't finished yet. Leah Simmons had been my anchor since sophomore year at the University of Oregon. We first met in a cramped literature seminar. Both of us late, both scrambling for the last 2 seats left. She shot me a crooked grin and whispered, "Guess we're screwed together." That was all it took. From then on, we were inseparable. We shared apartments, patched each other up through brutal breakups, toasted promotions, and wandered through quiet streets at night just to keep talking. Life pulled us to different corners of Portland. Me to a small East Side apartment, her to a duplex across town. But Fridays were untouchable. Maple Grind was ours. The cafe was nothing fancy. Mismatched chairs, chalkboard menus, chipped mugs regulars claimed like trophies. But the place had the perfect balance of background hum and stillness, letting conversations unravel for hours. That's where we emptied out our weeks over lattes, trading stories of bad bosses and strange dreams. It was late March 2021 when the rhythm broke. Rain had been drumming since dawn, turning sidewalks slick and streets into silver mirrors. Stuck in traffic, I watched the clock eat away at our meeting time. By the time I pushed through Maple Grind's door dripping wet, Leah was already at our spot by the window. Her coffee sat untouched, her hands cupped around the mug like she needed its warmth. "You okay?" I asked, dropping into the chair opposite her. She hesitated too long. "Yeah, just tired, but I'd known her for nearly a decade." Her shoulders curled in, her eyes flicked toward the counter too often. That's when I saw him. Tall black raincoat dripping onto the floor, standing unnaturally still as he waited. His gaze swept the room, then froze on us. It lingered. We tried to talk, but Leah's voice was thin, her laugh absent. The usual cozy murmur of the cafe felt muted, strained. One of the baristas, a kid with unruly dark hair, kept pacing behind the register, glancing at the door like he was bracing for something. Leah leaned forward, lips parting to speak, but stopped when the man approached our table. "Leah," he said, his voice soft yet sharp. "You weren't answering my calls." Her face went pale. She whispered my name, not as a greeting, but a warning. "This is Evan," she said quickly, barely meeting my eyes. "My ex. He's been showing up." I pushed my chair back and stood. "She doesn't want to talk to you." His eyes locked onto mine, unblinking. "This isn't your business." Before I could reply, the barista's voice rang out, firm. "Sir, you need to leave." Evan's hand slipped into his coat. A cold certainty gripped me. I was about to watch something irreversible. But instead of a gun, he pulled a switchblade. The metallic click echoed like a gunshot as the blade snapped open, pointed at me. Everything slowed. The sharp inhale from Leah, the scrape of a chair, the bitter smell of espresso heavy in the air. Then chaos. A man near the door lunged, tackling Evan from behind. The knife clattered across the floor. spinning before sliding beneath a table. Shouts erupted, chairs crashed, coffee spilled. I grabbed Leah's arm and yanked her toward the back. Her hand was ice cold in mine as we slipped on the wet tile, shoving through the exit into the alley. Rain lashed our faces, but we didn't stop until we reached the next block, collapsing under the awning of a closed bookstore. Leah pressed against the wall, breath ragged, eyes scanning the shadows like she expected him to appear again. "You have to tell me what's going on," I said, keeping my voice steady. Her throat worked as she swallowed. "It's been weeks. He's been at my place, my job. I thought if I ignored him..." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want to drag you into it." Distant sirens cut through the storm. My fists were clenched, nails biting into skin. Too late. "We're going to the police." Minutes later, 2 patrol cars pulled up outside the cafe. We walked back cautious, but the scene was under control. Evan stood cuffed, raincoat heavy with water, his face unreadable as officers led him into a cruiser. The man who had tackled him gave us a small nod like it was nothing. Inside, we gave our statements. Leah trembled beside me, her fingers tapping the table in jittery bursts. The knife sat sealed in an evidence bag, its blade catching the harsh fluorescent light glinting sharp and final. The officer in charge explained that Evan would be booked, though bail was still a possibility. "We'll process a restraining order," he added, his voice heavy with the tired cadence of someone who'd said those words too many times. "But it'll take a while." The rain outside hadn't let up, and when we stepped out, Leah seemed diminished, as if the day itself had pressed her down. "Can I stay at your place?" she asked, her voice quiet, uncertain. "Of course," I said without hesitation. That night she curled up on my couch beneath an old quilt, the television flickering in soft bursts of light. I sat in the armchair with a book open in my lap, eyes skimming lines I couldn't read, ears straining for every shift of sound outside. Days slid into weeks. Leah stayed with me, only venturing out for work and never alone. She changed her number, erased her social media, refused to answer knocks at the door unless we expected someone. Every creak of the hallway floor made her shoulders stiffen. Every unfamiliar face on the street stole her attention. Slowly, I came to understand the suffocating erosion of normalcy when you're being watched. It wasn't just fear of what Evan might do, but the gnawing question of when. Even in my apartment, I found myself checking locks twice, glancing at windows, convinced some piece of him lingered just out of sight. The restraining order finally arrived, a flimsy sheet of paper that felt laughably thin against the memory of a blade glinting under fluorescent light. Still, Leah held onto it like it was proof she hadn't imagined the danger. One night, over half-empty takeout boxes and sitcom reruns that neither of us were really watching, Leah admitted the truth she'd hidden. "He followed me home from work once," she said, her voice nearly a whisper. "Didn't try anything. Just stood across the street. Hours. I thought I could handle it alone. I didn't want to burden you." I set my chopsticks down. "Leah, you're my best friend. You could never be a burden, but you could have been..." I cut myself short, the weight of what I almost said hanging in the air. She nodded, her gaze locked on the food she hadn't touched. "I know." Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the glass, marking time, reminding us that the city was still wide awake, and so was he. By summer, the rain gave way to long, hot evenings, the sun lingering well past 9. Leah had returned to her own place, though I still called nightly. She sounded better, steadier, though a thread of caution ran beneath her words. One Thursday she invited me over. Dinner was set with mismatched plates, and on the table sat the bottle of wine we'd saved since college, waiting for some elusive right moment. We laughed over old stories, swapped gossip, and for a while it felt like we'd reclaimed the past. Then, as we were clearing dishes, Leah froze, her eyes locked on the front window. My body braced before I even looked. Across the street, a man leaned against a lamppost, half swallowed by shadow. No raincoat this time, but the posture, too still, too deliberate, sent a jolt through me. "It's not him," Leah said quickly, reading my thoughts. "Just someone." But her voice wavered, and I didn't believe her. Neither did she. We sat back down, pretending to finish our wine, our glances drifting to the window again and again. And then, without a sound, the spot was empty. After that night, I stopped believing in clean endings. Leah adapted in her own way. Security cameras, self-defense classes, her phone always within reach. I stayed close, not because she needed protecting, but because I knew the quiet ruin of living with the chance that the worst might return without warning. The last time we spoke of Evan, we were on a park bench watching children play tag. Leah said she'd stopped wishing for him to be arrested again. Now she only hoped he'd forget her. That's the scariest part, she said softly. Not knowing if you're still in someone's head. I didn't have an answer. We sat in silence as the late sun fell through the trees. In the end, Maple Grind wasn't just the site of one violent interruption. It was proof of how fragile safety really is, how quickly the ordinary can twist into something unrecognizable. I learned then that when someone you love is in danger, you don't wait for them to ask for help. You act. Because silence is where fear grows strongest. And sometimes the only thing that can drown it out is the voice of someone who refuses to let you face it alone. I never used to think about how some days begin. You wake up, make coffee, check your phone, and assume it's just another dot on the calendar. But later you look back and realize something was off from the first breath you took. Like the day had already decided where it would take you, whether you agreed or not. That Monday morning in late October of 2019 felt exactly like that. I'd been in Cedar Hill for 3 years, long enough to know the town's rhythm. Slow breakfasts at the diner, the hiss of buses pulling away from the terminal, the damp forest smell right before the snow came. I worked from home as a freelance illustrator, at least I tried to. My biggest client, a small press specializing in obscure graphic novels, had gone silent 2 months ago, leaving me scrambling to pay rent. I picked up scraps of work, pet portraits, commissioned character art for indie authors, but it never quite added up. That night, I'd been at my friend Molly's apartment in a neighboring suburb. Molly's place was warm and crowded with life. You could lose track of time just listening to her talk. We ordered takeout, opened a bottle of wine, and suddenly the clock read 10:47 p.m. "You better hustle if you want to make that last bus," she said, handing me my coat. "You're crashing here," she added. "You miss it," I laughed. "I'll make it." The terminal's what, 15 minutes from here? It ended up being closer to 20. By the time I reached the Cedar Hill bus terminal, my breath came out in sharp clouds. October in Vermont wasn't gentle. The cold had a metallic edge that crawled through gloves and settled in your bones. The place was almost empty. A flickering vending machine hummed near the entrance. In the far corner, a janitor in a faded hoodie pushed a broom slowly, like he had all night to finish the job. I noticed a man sitting on one of the benches, long green coat, shoulders hunched, still as a statue. He looked up briefly when I walked in, and his eyes caught the overhead light just enough to make me look away. I sat 2 benches away, hugging my sketchbook to my chest. My phone screen showed 8% battery, just enough to text Molly that I'd made it. The janitor disappeared into a storage closet. The air felt heavier once he was gone. "Do you believe in patterns?" The man's voice was low and rasping, like he hadn't used it in hours. I glanced over. Not really sure what you mean." He leaned forward, elbows on his knees. "Some nights are designed to happen a certain way, no matter what you do. You can change the order of the steps, but not where you end up." I gave a small, polite smile, the kind you give strangers when you don't want to encourage them. "That so?" He nodded once, eyes locked on me. "You'll see." Before I could think of a way to end the conversation, the hiss of air brakes filled the room. The last bus had arrived. The relief that washed over me when the headlights spilled across the terminal windows was almost physical. I stood slinging my bag over my shoulder. The bus door opened with a groan and I climbed aboard quickly. The driver wasn't Tom, the stocky older guy with a quick smile who liked to tell corny jokes. This driver looked younger, maybe mid-30s, but his face had a drawn, unhealthy pallor. His eyes were sunken, and when he smiled, it didn't reach anywhere near them. "Evening," I said, swiping my pass. He gave a short nod, that strange smile still fixed in place. I chose a seat in the middle out of habit, close enough to the driver to feel safe, far enough not to be in his mirror constantly. The man in the green coat boarded next, taking a seat 2 rows behind me. The bus pulled away from the terminal, the engine grumbling. For the first few blocks, the windows reflected the inside lights, but once we hit the outskirts of town, the glass turned black, showing only the trees sliding past. I told myself it was just a normal ride. In 20 minutes, I'd be unlocking my apartment door, heating up leftover pasta, curling under the blanket my grandmother had knitted. But 20 minutes came and went. The road outside was unfamiliar. No gas stations, no street lamps, just dense forest pressing close to the edge of the asphalt. I frowned, leaning toward the aisle to see ahead. After another 10 minutes, I got up and walked to the front, keeping my voice steady. "Is this the Cedar Hill route?" "Excuse me." The driver met my eyes in the rearview mirror, his tone echoing that strange emphasis the man at the terminal had used. "We're getting there eventually." Behind me, a low chuckle. The man in the green coat. My fingers tightened on the seat back. "This doesn't look like the route," I said. The driver just smiled again and turned his eyes back to the road. I walked back to my seat, my pulse thudding in my ears. The bus kept going deeper into the dark. I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder. In the dim reflection of the window, I could see him. The man in the green coat leaning slightly forward, elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on me. He didn't blink often. I tried not to panic. Maybe there was some detour, some construction I hadn't heard about. But why hadn't the driver said anything? Why hadn't anyone else boarded? The bus rolled on, the forest outside pressing tighter, the road twisting in ways I didn't recognize. My phone was dead now, a useless weight in my coat pocket. After what felt like an hour since leaving the terminal, the bus slowed and eased onto a narrow shoulder. No signpost, no houses, not even the faint glow of a porch light. The driver turned in his seat to look at me. "This is your stop." I stared at him. "No, it's not. I'm not getting off here." His smile widened, but his eyes stayed flat. "It is tonight." I felt the shift in the air behind me before I saw it. The man in the green coat stood, stepping into the aisle. His presence filled the narrow space, blocking the way to the back. "I think there's been a mistake," I said, my voice tighter than I wanted it to be. "No mistake," the man said softly. "It's just how it goes." The open bus door let in a gust of icy air. I could hear the wind in the trees, a deep rushing sound like the ocean inside a seashell. I gripped my sketchbook like it might somehow protect me. My options were slim: push past him toward the back and pray there was an emergency exit, or take my chances out there in the dark. The driver tapped the steering wheel, impatient. "Time to move." I took a slow step forward, then another, my mind racing. The ground outside was hard, frozen under a thin skin of frost. The moment I stepped down, the bus door hissed shut behind me. The rumble of the engine faded as it pulled away, leaving me alone with the man in the green coat. The headlight swept over the trees one last time before disappearing. "You'll be fine," he said. "If you keep walking." "Where am I?" I asked. "Somewhere between where you were and where you're going," he said, smiling faintly as if the words were a private joke. I turned away from him and started walking down the road. My breath puffed white in the dark. My toes ached in my boots. Each step made me more aware of how far I was from anything familiar. Every few seconds I glanced back. The man wasn't following, but he was still there, standing exactly where I'd left him, his silhouette a dark slash against the trees. The road curved sharply, and for a brief moment I couldn't see him anymore. That should have been a relief, but instead my chest tightened. The silence was too complete. No crickets, no rustle of leaves, just the steady rhythm of my own footsteps. Somewhere ahead, a faint light appeared. I quickened my pace, hope flaring. It turned out to be an old gas station, boarded up and long abandoned. The windows were dark, but a dented metal trash can lay tipped on its side near the entrance. I don't know what made me look behind me then, but when I did, the road was empty. The man was gone. That was almost worse. I kept walking. My legs burned. My hands were numb. The cold had crept into my jaw so badly my teeth ached. Eventually, I saw the faint orange glow of a street lamp in the distance. When I reached it, I realized I was less than 3 miles from my apartment. I recognized the curve of the road, the sagging porch of the Miller place, the row of mailboxes leaning toward the ditch. My boots felt too heavy, so I kicked them off and walked barefoot the rest of the way. I told myself it was to be quiet, but really, I think I just wanted to feel the pavement, to know it was solid under me. As I climbed my apartment stairs, I heard it. Soft, distant laughter carried on the wind. It wasn't close, but it was clear enough to make my skin prickle. Inside, I locked the door and slid down against it, clutching my sketchbook. I stayed like that until the first light of morning bled through the blinds. I never saw the man in the green coat again. I never saw that driver again either. But some nights when I'm walking home late, I'll see the headlights of a bus cutting through the dark in the distance, and I'll cross the street just in case. People always ask what I think really happened that night. I tell them the truth, I don't know. Maybe it was a setup. Maybe it was a mistake. Or maybe it was one of those nights, the kind the man talked about, the kind that's designed from the start. Some warnings come too late, but the ones we notice in time are only useful if we act on them. Trust your instincts even when you can't explain why. They might be the only thing standing between you and the point of no return. Looking back, I still can't pinpoint the exact moment when things started to turn strange. It didn't happen like in a movie, with a swelling score that warned you something terrible was about to happen. It was quieter, slower, like a draft sneaking under a door. The summer of 2017 was supposed to be my first real taste of adulthood. I just landed an entry-level job at a small publishing company in Richmond, Virginia. The building itself was a character, floors that groaned under every step, humming fluorescent lights, and a coffee pot that produced liquid tasting faintly of burnt toast no matter who brewed it. I was 23, broke, and sharing a one-bedroom apartment above a florist shop with my best friend, Holly Peterson. We'd met freshman year of college, back when we thought starting our own press would be some romantic act of rebellion. Instead, we were proofreading casserole cookbooks and answering emails about delayed print runs. But even that felt like progress. The office was its own little ecosystem of 15 people, each stranger than the last. Mara, the receptionist, somehow knew everyone's secrets without ever prying. Phil from Layout wore the same faded corduroy jacket year-round as if it were a uniform. And then there was our boss, Ruth, whose voice always sounded like she was delivering bad news even when she wasn't. Holly's desk sat in the back by the printers, while mine was near the window up front. We'd wave at each other across the room and slip sarcastic post-it notes under each other's keyboards about the day's chaos. For the first month, it was boring in the most comforting way possible. Coffee runs, splitting sandwiches from the deli next door, and awkward office birthday celebrations where everyone stood around singing too softly, staring at their shoes. Then in early August, Daniel Price started. He was late 20s, tall but not imposing, with pale skin and a habit of never quite meeting your eyes, or holding your gaze just a beat too long when he did. He barely spoke beyond what his job demanded. I didn't think much of it at first. Some people are just quiet, but there was something else. Something I noticed immediately. He never smiled. Not once. At lunch one day, I mentioned it to Holly. "He never smiles," I said, unwrapping my sandwich. "Not even a polite one," she shrugged, stabbing at her salad. "He's probably just shy." She said it like that was the end of the discussion, but I couldn't shake the way he always seemed to be near her. By the printer with no papers in his hands. In the break room just as she walked in from lunch. Always a step behind her, too often to be coincidence. Mara noticed it too. One afternoon, as I was passing the front desk, she leaned toward me and whispered, "Your friend's got an admirer." Her tone didn't sound like gossip. It sounded like a warning. It started small. Sticky notes left on Holly's desk when she stepped away. Never signed, always vague. "You have a nice laugh. Some people don't appreciate you enough." We joked about it at first, figuring some awkward office flirt was testing the waters. Then came the clown figurines. The first one showed up on a Yee. Wednesday, a little porcelain clown with a cracked smile, sitting on Holly's chair when she arrived. We laughed, called it creepy, and set it on her desk like it was a gag gift. 2 days later, another appeared. Then another. By the time there were 4, she started keeping them in a drawer so she didn't have to see their painted eyes staring at her all day. Around that time, I had my own encounter. I was working late, the office dark except for the pool of light from my desk lamp. The hum of the building seemed louder without anyone else around. I heard the water cooler bubble and turned. Daniel was standing by Holly's desk. He wasn't touching anything, just staring at her empty chair like he was studying it. "Daniel?" I said, my voice sounding too sharp in the stillness. He didn't move at first. Then slowly he looked at me, eyes pale and unblinking before turning and walking out without a word. The silence he left behind felt heavier than before. like the office itself was holding its breath. "Daniel," I said, my voice coming out thinner than I meant. He turned slowly, almost theatrically, his eyes meeting mine for a heartbeat before he gave a single, deliberate nod. Without a word, he brushed past me, the faint smell of his coffee clinging to the air. I stood frozen a second longer than necessary, then forced myself to breathe. I told Holly the next day. She forced a laugh, but her fingers kept worrying the edge of her paper cup until it bent. "You're overthinking," she said, but her eyes flickered with something she couldn't disguise. From then on, we made an unspoken rule. Neither of us would ever be in the office alone with him. The turning point came on a Friday morning. I'd come in early, hoping to get a head start before a deadline. The office was quiet except for the copier humming in the corner, its rhythm oddly loud in the stillness. As I walked past the break room, I saw him, Daniel, sitting at the table with a mug of coffee. In front of him was a clown figurine, just like the others. But this one was different. There was a photo tucked under it, a candid shot of Holly taken from the side, her hair pulled back, wearing an old t-shirt. It wasn't from work. My stomach dropped, cold sweat blooming at my collar when I realized it was taken from our apartment balcony. My voice caught in my throat. "Where did you—" He smiled. For the first time since I'd met him, he smiled, and it wasn't kind. It was slow, deliberate, like he'd been saving it. I backed out of the break room, my heart hammering, and went straight to Holly's desk. "Pack your bag," I whispered, my voice shaking. "Now." We left without telling anyone, my pulse pounding all the way down the stairs. That weekend we called the police. They ran his name and found a history, a restraining order from a former coworker in another state. The details made my hands tremble as I held the phone. On Monday, the company fired him, but that wasn't the end. Within 2 weeks, Holly started getting envelopes with no return address. Inside each one was a single clown sticker. No note, no explanation, just the sticker staring back at her from our kitchen table like a taunt. We reported it, but nothing came of it. Without proof of who sent them, the police couldn't do much. We changed the locks on the apartment, kept the blinds closed, avoided walking alone after dark. Holly stopped sitting on the balcony altogether. Months later, the letters stopped. Maybe he got bored. Maybe he moved on. But even now, years later, I still catch myself scanning crowds for his face. Holly and I both carry that summer like a shadow, sometimes invisible, but always there. We never figured out how he got the photos, whether he followed us home or watched from somewhere nearby. Sometimes I think about asking Holly if she still has the clown figurines, but I don't really want to know. It's strange how a person can enter your life so quietly and leave behind something you never shake. I think about that first smile he gave me, how it felt like the air in the room shifted. And I remember deciding in that moment that we had to leave right then, without second guessing. When your instincts tell you something is wrong, trust them. Danger doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it hides in small, unsettling patterns. It's better to act and be wrong than to hesitate and find out you were right too late. There are mornings that seem ordinary until time sharpens them into something unforgettable. Years later, you can still smell the coffee, hear the scrape of a chair against tile, remember the exact tone of someone saying your name. One morning in April 2016 has lived in my head ever since. I was 20 then, still clumsy with the question of who I wanted to be. That spring I'd moved to Port Towns, Washington. It wasn't far, just across the state, but it felt like stepping into another life. My cousin let me crash on the couch in his shoebox apartment above a laundromat. The floors trembled when the dryers kicked on. The walls were thin enough to catch the neighbors' late-night sitcom reruns, and the kitchen barely fit 2 people without a collision. But it was cheap and it was temporary. Lena Carter had been my best friend since sophomore year of high school. She'd joined me at the same community college a month earlier, limping out of a breakup with a guy who had wrung every bit of brightness out of her. We slid back into our rhythm easily, most mornings spent at the Velvet Bean, a snug little coffee shop pressed between an antique bookstore and a bike repair shop. The Bean was all big windows that blurred with rain, a rotating gallery of local art, and a constant trickle of soft indie music. Our corner booth was half hidden, perfect for whispering secrets or just breathing quietly. That morning, the sky was flat gray, fog rolling off the water so thick the ferry horn sounded close enough to touch. Lena was doodling in the margin of her notebook like always, while I slogged through a reading for Intro to Sociology. We were already halfway through our second round of Americanos when the door opened. A couple stepped in first, mid-30s, dressed crisp like they'd just slipped out of a boardroom. With them was a girl, maybe 8 or 9, in a faded yellow sweater. She clutched a stuffed rabbit so tight the ears bent sideways. Straight brown hair framed her face, but her eyes didn't seem to land on anything. "Cute bunny," Lena murmured, following my gaze. "But she looks, I don't know, not happy. Weird place to bring a kid." I nodded. It wasn't just her silence, it was the faint bruises along her wrist, revealed when her sleeve slid back. The couple ordered drinks and sat across from us, whispering in clipped, sharp tones that carried the shape of an argument. The girl sat perfectly still, rabbit locked in her grip like it was the only thing keeping her tethered. The woman's phone rang and both adults stepped outside, leaving the girl alone. I glanced at Lena. The way the girl kept flicking her eyes to the door made my stomach tighten. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" Lena asked. "Yeah," I muttered, sliding out of the booth. I approached slowly, crouching so I wouldn't loom over her. "Hey," I said softly, nodding at the rabbit. "That's a nice bunny. What's his name?" Her eyes darted to me, hesitant, like she wasn't sure I was real. "Ol," she whispered at last. "That's a great name," I said, smiling carefully. "I'm Mia. Is everything okay?" She looked toward the window where the couple stood with their backs to us. "Can't talk to people," she murmured. The way she said it, flat, not scared, not stubborn, made something twist hard in my chest. Her nails were bitten raw, some down to skin. "Do you want to help me pick out a cookie for Oliver?" I asked, tipping my chin toward the counter. She didn't smile, but she slid off her chair, rabbit dangling at her side, and followed me. Ty, the barista, was polishing mugs behind the counter. I caught his eye. He'd once broken up a fight in the cafe, once tossed out a drunk who wouldn't leave. He knew when something wasn't right. I gave him a look. I hoped Ty caught the look I gave him. While the girl's eyes drifted over the pastry case, Lena slid her phone onto her lap under the table, fingers flying. I knew she was either pulling up the non-emergency police number or texting someone who could respond faster. The door slammed open. The man strode back in, his voice tight and sharp. "Come here now." The girl froze. Without thinking, I moved in front of her. "She's not your business," he snapped, stepping closer. His hand darted toward her shoulder. Lena stood, her voice steady in a way that surprised me. "The police are on their way." He stopped mid-step. His face flickered, first anger, then something colder, calculated. His eyes shifted to the woman outside, then back to us. "You don't know what you're doing," he said. Ty came around the counter, phone in hand. "Trust me," he said evenly. "You'll regret it if you don't leave. Now." The man's jaw tightened. Then without another word, he spun around, grabbed the woman's arm, and yanked her out the door. The girl crumpled against her rabbit, quiet sobs muffled in the worn fur. Lena wrapped an arm around her shoulders and gently guided her back to our booth. I slid into the seat across from them, my eyes fixed on the window in case the couple returned. Ty spoke low and urgent into the phone. "Possible missing child. Adults, mid-30s, male and female. Left in a hurry, east on Water Street." The police arrived within 10 minutes. One officer knelt beside the girl, speaking softly, while the other took our statements. I told them about the bruises, her distant gaze, how she'd said she wasn't allowed to talk to people. Lena added her observations, her tone clipped and firm. When they finally led the girl outside, one of the officers paused at the door. "We've had a missing child alert out of Kitsap County for 2 weeks," he said. "You did the right thing. She's been reported missing." The door shut, and suddenly the coffee shop felt hollow, too quiet. Lena stared at her untouched drink. "We almost didn't say anything," she whispered. "Yeah," I said. My hands were still trembling. We stayed another hour, barely talking, both of us flinching every time the bell above the door jingled. I kept expecting the man to storm back in. That night, lying on the pull-out couch in my cousin's apartment, the scene replayed in loops. The girl's bitten nails, the bruises. The man's words, "You don't know what you're doing." But he was wrong. We knew exactly what we were doing. What scared me was how close we'd come to doing nothing. The next week, Lena and I went back to the Velvet Bean as if nothing had changed. Same booth, same coffee, same view of the street, but every so often we'd both glance at the door, listening for the slam of it opening or the cut of a voice. Ty told us later that the police had called him. The girl had been reunited with her aunt who had custody. The couple was being investigated on multiple charges. That news should have brought relief. Instead, it left me uneasy. If we hadn't spoken up, she might still be out there with them. How many other kids were? Kids nobody noticed, or worse, kids people noticed and chose to ignore. Months later, Lena and I were walking downtown when I spotted a girl in a yellow sweater across the street. For a heartbeat, my chest clenched. I thought it was her. Then she laughed, running to her mother with an ice cream cone melting in her hand. Lena caught my expression. "You okay?" "Yeah," I lied. Because the truth was, that morning in the coffee shop had rewired something in me. It showed me how thin the line is between being a bystander and stepping in. Blink, and that line disappears. We never saw the girl again. I hope she's safe. I hope she still has Oliver the rabbit. I hope more people chose to step in for her. Even now, sitting in coffee shops, I catch myself scanning the room without meaning to. Not searching for trouble exactly, just watching for someone too quiet, too still, eyes too far away. When something feels wrong, don't brush it aside. Stepping in might feel awkward, inconvenient, even risky, but silence costs more than you think. You might be the only one willing to act, and for someone else, that can mean everything. It's strange how certain nights refuse to fade. Years pass, you switch jobs, lose friends, shapeshift into some new version of yourself. Yet one particular evening waits in the back of your mind like a splinter you never dig out. For me, that night was the Winter Carnival of 2013 in Maple Falls, Vermont. Every time snow drifts under streetlights, it resurfaces, the cold burrowing into my bones. The smell of fried dough hanging in the air, and the way my pulse kept hammering no matter how much I whispered to myself that everything was fine. I was 17 then, living with my Aunt Karen. My parents' marriage had come apart in one of those ugly unravelings where both swore they were right, too busy screaming to notice their kids stranded in the wreckage. Mom moved 3 states away to start fresh. Dad stayed behind but didn't bother to check if I was okay. Aunt Karen's house was small but warm, and she tried to fill the void they left. I kept my grades decent, worked weekends at the library, mostly kept to myself. The exception was Elliot James. Tall, lanky, always carrying a camera like it was fused to him. He'd been my closest friend since 5th grade. Sarcastic but never cruel. He noticed things. Frost clinging to mailboxes, the twitch in someone's eye when they lied. You couldn't hide from him. We'd survived braces, failed guitar lessons, and endless afternoons building snow forts together. That February, Elliot wouldn't shut up about the carnival. He wanted night shots for his portfolio. Ferris wheel lights against the snow, fireworks over the rink. I wasn't in the mood for crowds or cold, but saying no to him felt like saying no to the last shred of normal I had. So on Saturday night, bundled in 2 sweaters and my heaviest coat, I met him under the wooden arch at the fairgrounds. Maple Falls might have been small, but the carnival was its crown jewel. Folks drove in from neighboring counties to eat greasy food, play rigged games, skate on the fire department's makeshift rink. The air smelled of kettle corn and grilled sausage. Elliot was in his element, crouching for shots every few steps, the click of his shutter constant. I was halfway through hot chocolate when I noticed him. A man in a long brown coat and dark beanie. Late 20s, maybe early 30s. Not smiling, not eating, not talking, just watching. And I knew his eyes were on us. I leaned toward Elliot. "You know that guy?" He followed my glance. "Nope, why?" "He's just, never mind." I told myself I was imagining it. Big crowds made you feel watched, but every time we moved, he was there, by the game booths near the fire pit off by the stage. When Elliot spotted a vantage point near a row of old storage sheds, my stomach twisted. It was quieter there, the music fading. My phone buzzed, Aunt Karen asking when I'd be home. I looked up mid-reply and froze. The man stood in the shadows between us and the nearest light pole. "Elliot," I whispered. "We should go back. One sec." This shot's perfect. He was bent over his tripod, absorbed. The man stepped closer, snow crunching under boots. Each movement deliberate, rehearsed. I gripped Elliot's sleeve. He shook me off. "You two from around here?" the man asked. His voice was flat, practiced. Elliot hesitated. Yeah." The man's gaze locked on me, pressing against my skin. "Be careful walking back alone. Some people get lost out here." A crack split the air behind the sheds, wood or ice breaking. His head turned. I glimpsed something in his coat pocket. Not a phone, bulkier, heavier. "Elliot, now." My voice was sharper than I meant. We hurried back toward the fairgrounds. I didn't look back, though I felt his stare burning holes. Only when we hit the crowd did I notice my hands shaking. Elliot stopped suddenly, staring at his screen. "Look at this." His last shot was blurry, but the man was in it, smiling. No, grinning, wide enough to make my stomach clench. And behind him, half hidden by shadow, another figure. Someone I hadn't seen at all. I told him we needed security. He muttered it was probably nothing, maybe a prank. But he didn't delete the photo. We left early. I stayed at his house. Safer than walking home. His mom made popcorn, put on an old movie, but I couldn't focus. Every creak of the house made me jump. Outside, snow buried the carnival. That was the last time I went. For weeks, the photo stayed on Elliot's camera. We rarely mentioned it. Sometimes I'd catch him scrolling past, his thumb hovering over delete, then moving on. I told myself it was nothing. A weird coincidence, a trick of nerves that we'd just been caught up in the tension of that night. But deep down, I didn't believe it. About a month later, I was walking home from the library when I spotted a long brown coat across the street. My heart jumped before my brain caught up. The man was halfway down the block, head bent, moving with that same unhurried pace. It might not have been him. Coats like that weren't rare, I told myself. But when he reached the corner, he stopped, turned his head, and looked straight at me. Then he kept walking. I went straight to Aunt Karen's, locked the door, and didn't tell her. I didn't want her thinking I was making things up for attention. Elliot had changed too. He was quieter, distracted, skipping our usual walks after school, saying he had editing to do. One afternoon, I dropped by his place unannounced. His camera sat on the kitchen table, screen glowing. The photo of the man in the brown coat was zoomed in so far the pixels blurred together, but you could still see the grin. "You're still looking at it," I said. He jumped like he'd been caught. "It's weird, right? Look at the other guy in the background. Doesn't it seem—" I leaned over. The shadowy figure was almost impossible to make out. Broad shoulders, maybe a hood. Could be anyone. "Yeah," Elliot said, but his voice didn't sound convinced. A few nights later, my phone buzzed at 11:42 p.m. A text from an unknown number. "You looked cold that night. Dress warmer next time." My chest went tight. I showed it to Elliot the next day and his face drained of color. "Respond?" he said. "Just don't. But by then I knew whoever had been watching us at the carnival hadn't stopped. After that text, I couldn't shake the feeling of being followed. I started checking behind me every time I walked home, taking longer routes just to see if anyone was keeping pace. Most nights the streets were empty, but sometimes I'd catch a flicker of movement in a shop window's reflection, or hear the crunch of footsteps in the snow that stopped when I stopped. I told myself it was just nerves. That's what fear does. It teaches you to doubt your own senses. One night in March, Elliot called and told me to meet him at the diner. He sounded urgent. When I got there, he was in a booth with his camera bag open and a manila envelope in front of him. He didn't even say hello, just slid the envelope across the table. Inside were printed photos, grainy, taken at night from a distance. Us at the carnival, at the library, walking home. In one, I was standing at Aunt Karen's mailbox, head down, flipping through letters. "These were in my locker this morning," he said. No note, no explanation. I stared at the photos. "You think it's him?" Elliot nodded slowly. "Look at the angle. They're taken from far away, but always the same height, same lens every time." I didn't want to believe it, but I'd known for weeks something wasn't right. Whoever this was, they weren't just lurking at public events anymore. They were in our neighborhoods. That night, I asked Aunt Karen if I could start staying later at the library to help with closing. She didn't question it, just reminded me to take the well-lit streets home. I didn't tell her about the photos or the text. Part of me thought saying it out loud would make it worse, but silence didn't keep him away. The last time I saw the man in the brown coat was in early April, a week before the snow melted for good. Elliot had convinced me to walk out to the old railway bridge for some sunset shots. The place was deserted, just rusted steel over the river and the low hum of water below. We were halfway across when I saw him. He was standing at the far end of the bridge, hands in his coat pockets, face shadowed by the sinking sun. That grin, I recognized it instantly. "Elliot," I said quietly. "I see him." His voice was tight. He raised his camera like he was about to take a picture, but the man took one slow step forward, then another. There was nowhere to go except back the way we came. My legs felt heavy, but I forced them to move. The man didn't speed up, didn't shout, just kept closing the distance with that deliberate walk. Halfway back to solid ground, I heard Elliot's shutter click twice, then stop. I didn't look back until we hit the road. When I did, the man was gone, just an empty bridge behind us. We went straight to the police station. They took our statements, glanced at the photos, said there wasn't much they could do without proof of a direct threat or trespassing. That night, Elliot called and said he'd finally deleted the carnival photo. "Looking at it, he'll stop," he said. I wanted to believe him. Maybe if we stop. A week later, he and his mom moved to Burlington. My aunt said it was for a job opportunity, but I never got the real reason from him. We still text sometimes, but we don't talk about the winter carnival. As for me, I still live in Maple Falls. I still walk past the fairgrounds in winter. And every so often, just at the edge of the snow-lit dark, I swear I see a tall figure in a brown coat, standing too still to be anyone in a hurry, watching, waiting. You can tell yourself it's nothing. You can try to explain it away. But when something feels wrong, trust your instincts. Fear might lie to you, but so can comfort. And sometimes the worst mistake is convincing yourself there's no danger at all. There are some friendships you don't just drift away from, no matter how much time passes or how much the two of you change. Caleb Moore was that anchor for me. If my life was a series of orbits, he was the sun I kept circling, even when I knew I should break free. We first met in the 4th grade. Caleb punched a kid square in the nose for stealing my lunch money. It wasn't some noble act of justice. Caleb just liked to fight. But to me, it felt like someone had decided I was worth defending. From that day on, we were inseparable. Sleepovers that stretched until dawn. Detention slips stuffed in our backpacks. Late-night bike rides through the bad parts of town. My parents hated it. They didn't see the boy who knelt on cracked pavement to bandage my knees with strips swiped from his mom's bathroom cabinet. They only saw the kid who once set a neighbor's mailbox on fire just to see how high the flames would go. By the time I was 19, my excuses had run out. My life wasn't moving forward. I'd already dropped out of community college after 1 semester. The lectures felt like static, the assignments pointless. The longer I sat in those suffocating classrooms, the louder the thought became, I don't belong here. My parents didn't take it well. My dad, a machinist who'd spent 3 decades grinding away at the same factory job, treated quitting like I'd carved failure into my skin. He wasn't a yeller when I was growing up, but that spring every word between us was an argument waiting to happen. The night it all blew apart, we were in the kitchen. My dad leaned against the counter, arms folded, jaw set hard. His voice cut sharp through the room. "You think the world owes you something?" I never said that. "You don't have a plan. You just quit." "Better than wasting years doing something I hate," I shot back. He shook his head slowly, like I was speaking a language he couldn't translate. My mom stood in the doorway with her arms wrapped tight around herself, her silence louder than any words. Heat rose in my chest until I couldn't stand it anymore. "You know what? Forget it," I snapped, snatching my jacket from the chair. "I don't need this." I stormed out without looking back. 2 blocks away, my hands shaking, I pulled out my phone and dialed Caleb. He picked up on the second ring. "You sound like a guy who needs a beer," he said. "Or 10, I muttered. "Can you come get me?" "Already on my way." When his beat-up Toyota finally pulled up, the music blasted so loud the bass rattled the side mirrors. Caleb leaned out the window, grinning like the night belonged to us. "Forget them," he said. "You don't need to listen to anyone. You've got me." I climbed in, and for the first time that night, the knot in my chest loosened. The first week on Caleb's couch blurred into greasy takeout boxes and midnight walks. Endless card games that stretched until the sun broke over the horizon. It felt like a vacation from my own life. No lectures, no disapproving stares, no one demanding a plan I didn't have. Caleb made the world feel like it was ours alone. We'd sit on his balcony smoking cheap cigarettes, watching the city lights glitter like they'd been strung up just for us. But underneath that easy freedom, I started noticing cracks. He'd vanish for hours without explanation, returning with the faint smell of sweat and cigarettes clinging to his clothes, his shirt wrinkled, his eyes sharp and restless, like he'd been riding a wave of adrenaline. Other nights he'd come back carrying thick stacks of cash, shoving them quickly into a dented metal box with chipped paint that he kept locked under his bed. He never let it out of his sight for long, and that was when I began to realize Caleb's orbit might not just pull me closer, it might drag me under. One night, Caleb stumbled through the door with a black eye blooming across his face and his lips split raw. "What the hell happened?" I asked, rising from the couch. "Bar fight," he muttered, shrugging off his jacket and tossing it onto the cushions. "Since when do you go to bars that punch back?" I pressed, trying to catch his eyes. He smirked, but it was shallow, brittle. "Don't worry about it." But I did. 2 nights later, while Caleb was in the shower, a knock rattled the apartment door. I opened it without thinking. A man stood there. Mid-40s maybe, tall, broad-shouldered, a worn leather jacket hanging off him. His eyes were flat, dead glass marbles. His voice was steady, deliberate. "Tell Caleb I'll see him Friday. And if he's not there, we've got a problem." He turned and walked off before I could form a reply. When I told Caleb later, I caught the briefest flicker, his body stiffening. His face locked tight before he forced a laugh. "Yeah, that's nothing. Don't worry about it." But I couldn't shake it. And when Friday came, the worry in my chest hardened into something heavier. Caleb never came home that night. My calls went unanswered. My texts sat unread. Every creak in the old apartment building felt like a warning, my stomach tightening until I could barely sit still. Just after sunrise, the lock clicked. Caleb stumbled in, pale and slick with sweat, his eyes bloodshot like he hadn't slept in days. He shoved the dented metal box into a backpack, zipped it hard, and said in a low, urgent voice, "We need to leave. Now." "What's going on?" I demanded. "I'll explain later. Just grab your stuff." "No," I said, planting my feet. "Tell me now." His jaw tightened, his gaze darting to the door as if someone might burst in at any second. "You'll understand soon." We drove in silence, the city shrinking in the rearview mirror, its skyline swallowed by rust and weeds as Caleb steered us toward the industrial outskirts. Empty factories loomed like skeletons against the gray morning sky. He pulled behind a boarded-up warehouse, cut the engine, and turned to me. "Stay in the car. I mean it." Before I could answer, he slipped out and vanished through a side door. Minutes dragged like hours. Then came the shouting, muffled but sharp, followed by the metallic crash of something heavy. My hands locked around the seat, knuckles aching white. The door banged open. Caleb sprinted out, breath tearing from his chest, a dark figure chasing close behind. He dove into the driver's seat, jammed the car into gear, and we screeched out of the lot, tires screaming on the cracked asphalt. Halfway back to town, he finally spoke. His voice was ragged, stripped bare. "I've been running stolen electronics for a local crew. Missed a delivery. They think I skimmed from them. That guy at the door? They know who you are now. Which means you're not safe either." After that night, the orbit shifted. Caleb stopped calling. The silence between us widened until it felt like an abyss. I packed up and went back to my parents' house. They didn't ask for details, and I didn't offer any. The air at home was tense but safer. Weeks blurred into months. Every so often I thought about reaching out, dialing his number just to hear his voice. But every time I saw that man's flat, cold eyes staring back at me, and the urge died. Then one afternoon a postcard slid through the mail slot. No return address, no picture. Just a single line scrawled in Caleb's uneven handwriting. "Better you stay away from me. It's safer. I keep it tucked in the back of my desk drawer." It's been years now. I never saw Caleb again. Sometimes I wonder if he's still alive, still running, or if the problems he dragged behind him finally caught up. A part of me hopes he found a way out. Another part knows people like Caleb rarely do. Loyalty is a powerful thing, but it can drag you under too. Loving someone doesn't mean following them into the fire. Sometimes the only way to save a friend is to let go, before the flames take you both. By April 2022, Chicago felt less like a city and more like a maze I couldn't escape. I'd been here long enough to know the shortcuts through alleys, the rhythm of the L, and the way the lake wind cut through every layer of clothing no matter how many you wore. But my life had settled into autopilot. Mornings were for grad school lectures, afternoons for stocking shelves at the bookstore, and nights for falling asleep mid-paragraph with a half-read textbook propped against my chest. Then Harper Lane broke through the routine. We'd met freshman year at Northwestern. Harper was the kind of girl who walked into a room like she already owned it, even if it was just a half-empty study lounge at 2 a.m. I was quieter, the kind of person who lingered at the edge of the party until someone like Harper pulled me into the center. Our friendship had always lived in that imbalance, her boldness, my caution. When she called that Thursday night, I hadn't seen her in over a year. She'd chased a whirlwind romance to LA with a guy she swore was different. In the photos she sent back then, they looked like something out of a magazine. Rooftop drinks, weekend getaways, his arm around her waist like she was the only thing anchoring him. But then the photos stopped, the texts grew shorter, and eventually even her voice disappeared. That night, though, her voice was full of fire again. "New job, new city, new me," she said, practically buzzing through the line. "Come out and celebrate. Warehouse Art Show, Industrial District." Don't say no, I hesitated. A midterm paper loomed and I had an early bookstore shift the next morning. But Harper's invitations had never been suggestions. They were momentum. You either followed or got left behind. The warehouse looked nothing like a gallery. Dim bulbs swung from chains, graffiti wrapped the walls, and the bass from a DJ booth made the concrete floor vibrate under my sneakers. The crowd was all edges and glitter, tattoos flashing in the colored lights, laughter and shouting blending into the music. Harper found me in seconds, drink in hand, her red coat aflare in the chaos. We caught up in fragments. Her job was complicated but exciting, her apartment small but finally hers. I started to tell her about the bookstore, but I noticed she kept glancing toward the entrance. "You waiting on someone?" I asked. She gave a quick laugh, too sharp. "Just people watching." But her hand tightened around her glass. It happened fast. One moment she leaned close to shout something over the music. The next, her whole expression drained. Her eyes locked on the door. The man who stepped in wore a gray bomber jacket, tall enough to rise above the crowd. He didn't look around. His gaze found Harper like he'd been searching for her all along. Her fingers clamped onto my arm. "We have to go, now." I opened my mouth to ask why, but she was already dragging me toward a side exit between two spray-painted panels. The night air slapped cold against my face, but Harper didn't slow. We were halfway down the lane when the black SUV screeched to a stop, blocking us. Tires screamed against the cracked asphalt. The man in the bomber jacket stepped out and another man circled around the hood. Together they filled the narrow street. The bomber jacket man smiled, but it was the kind of smile that made your stomach twist. "Leaving so soon, Harper? You still owe me a conversation." His voice was calm, smooth, too practiced. My pulse spiked. Harper muttered through clenched teeth. "Don't talk. Just run." The men moved forward, closing in. One reached into his jacket. I didn't want to know what he was reaching for. I shoved Harper toward the nearest alley, sneakers slapping wet pavement as we sprinted. We ducked between dumpsters and broken pallets until the alley spilled onto a busier street, washed in the sterile glow of streetlights. The first open door was a diner, its neon sign flickering. Inside smelled like burnt coffee and fried onions. We slid into a back booth, trying to look like just two exhausted students grabbing a late-night meal. My hands trembled as I picked up the sticky menu. "Okay," I said, my voice low. "What the hell was that?" Harper's eyes stayed on the window, scanning every shadow outside before she finally spoke. "That guy, his name's Evan. I met him in LA. We dated. At first, he was perfect. Knew every rooftop bar, made me feel like I was the center of the world. But when I ended it," her voice faltered. "When I ended it, he didn't let go. He just started showing up, places I hadn't told him I'd be. Friends saw him parked outside my building. I moved here to get away from him." Harper's voice cracked as she stared at her untouched coffee. "And now he's here. Guess I'm not as good at disappearing as I thought." We stayed in that diner for hours, nursing bitter refills, our eyes flicking to the door every time it creaked open. Around 2 a.m., we finally called a rideshare and slipped back to my apartment. I offered her my bed, but she refused. curling up on the couch with her coat still on like she was bracing for flight. Neither of us really slept. Every creak of the hallway, every muffled voice outside made us go still, listening. The next morning, I brewed coffee and tried to pretend life hadn't shifted. Harper insisted she'd handle it, that I didn't need to get involved. But the tightness in her voice betrayed her, and I knew she didn't fully believe her own words. The following days felt like carrying a live wire in my chest. I still dragged myself to class, still stacked books at work, still came home to my cramped apartment at night, but everything felt paper thin, fragile, like the real world was sliding just beneath the surface, waiting to break through. Harper made the couch her home, her suitcase wedged between the wall and the coffee table as if ready to bolt at a moment's notice. She barely left, maybe a smoke break on the fire escape, maybe a run to the corner store, and each time she returned, her eyes scanned the street like she expected the SUV to be waiting. Whenever I asked if she'd gone to the police, she brushed it off. One night, staring into a chipped mug of tea, she whispered, "You don't get it. Guys like him don't care about police reports. All it does is make them angrier." So we settled into a fragile rhythm. I left for classes in the morning and she stayed inside, usually by the window, eyes tracing the street below. She never said his name again after that first night. But then the text started. I'd hear her phone buzz, watch her shoulders stiffen as she read. She never let me see the screen. Her hands would shake, her eyes gloss over, and she'd place the phone face down on the table as though it were a venomous thing. On the fifth night, we were eating greasy takeout on the couch when her phone buzzed again. She glanced once, then locked the screen. Her food sat untouched. "I think I should go," she murmured. "Go where?" "Somewhere he can't find me." I wanted to argue, to tell her running wasn't a solution, but the truth knotted in my throat. I couldn't promise she'd be safe here. That silence felt like failure. The next morning, I woke to a quiet that felt wrong. The couch was empty. The blanket she'd been using was neatly folded over the armrest. Her suitcase was gone, so was her phone charger, her jacket, her toothbrush in the bathroom. The only thing left was a sticky note on the fridge. "You're safer without me." The words sat in my chest like lead. I read them over and over as if repetition might change them into something less final. For days, I convinced myself she'd text, call, or just walk back in like nothing had happened. I kept checking my phone, every unknown number making my heart lurch with equal parts hope and dread. But days bled into weeks and the silence didn't break. Sometimes walking home from class, I'd feel eyes on me. I'd glance over my shoulder, scan faces in passing cars, but I never saw the SUV again. That didn't mean it wasn't out there. It's been more than 2 years now. I haven't heard from Harper. I tell myself she got away, that she's living somewhere warm and anonymous under a new name. But sometimes late at night, I remember the fear in her eyes in that diner and wonder if she ever ran far enough. Every so often, when my phone lights up with a blocked number, I let it go to voicemail. Because if it's her, I'm not sure which truth I'll be forced to face. Sometimes loyalty means standing with your friends through anything. But sometimes the danger they carry leaks into your own life. And the bravest choice isn't holding on, it's letting go. You can love someone deeply and still step back to protect yourself. It's not betrayal. It's survival. Looking back now, I can't name the exact moment Eli Carter began to slip out of my life. We'd once been inseparable, two lanky kids from a quiet Oregon town always chasing music, adventure, and the next stupid joke that left us doubled over. When I landed a marketing job in Seattle, one of my first thoughts was, finally, we'll be in the same city again. Eli had been here since college, bouncing between odd jobs and part-time work, but we'd always stayed close. At first, it was perfect. Saturday mornings meant overpriced coffee at a cafe that insisted on spinning vinyl records while we argued over which decade had the best rock albums. Sundays, we laced up our boots and took to Mount Si or Rattlesnake Ledge. Not for the views, though they were breathtaking, but for the hours of wandering talk. But by midsummer, something shifted. He started canceling plans, claiming work needed him. Yet he dodged every question about his job. His texts shortened. His grin showed less often, and when it did, it felt brittle, as if his mind was tuned to some frequency I couldn't hear. By late August, I knew something bigger was wrong. That Thursday night, his name lit up my phone. His voice was tight, unsteady. "Man, I need to talk, but not here. Meet me at Lincoln Pier, 10 o'clock. Please. I almost refused. The pier wasn't a place for heart-to-hearts. It was quiet, eerie at night, with the hum of the marina and the occasional fisherman lurking in shadows. But his tone cut through me. Yeah, I told him. I'll be there. When I pulled in, the air reeked of salt and diesel, the water slapping softly against the docks. Eli stood at the railing, hood up, hands buried in his sweatshirt. He didn't smile, just tipped his head toward a nearby bench. A man sat there, tall, lean, leather jacket worn thin, tapping his foot in a restless rhythm. Eli's eyes flicked to mine. This is Mason. I owe him money. A lot of money. For a heartbeat, I thought he was pulling some prank. We'd faked band breakups before just to get a rise out of people. But the way he wouldn't meet my gaze told me this was real. Mason rose, deliberate in every step. His voice was calm but sharp enough to cut. You're the friend, he said, as if confirming a bet. Watch him disappear. You can help him, or... My half-laugh choked in my throat. Help him? How? His faint smile didn't reach his eyes. Come with us. We'll sort it out. I turned to Eli, waiting for the old smirk, the signal this was a joke gone too far. Instead, he hunched deeper, muttering words I couldn't catch. Against every instinct, I nodded. Mason's car was a dented black sedan, stinking of gasoline and stale smoke. I drove behind them through the industrial district until we stopped at an abandoned lot by the freight yards. Under a dim orange streetlight, 2 more men waited. The next minutes blurred. Raised voices, jagged accusations I couldn't untangle. Mason demanded my phone and wallet. One of the others shoved Eli hard, calling him a liar. My pulse hammered, and then it hit me. Eli hadn't called for advice. He hadn't called for comfort. He'd called because I was leverage, a bargaining chip to buy him time. The betrayal burned hotter than the fear. When one man spat on the pavement, I bolted, shoved past him, sprinted for the chain-link fence. My palms tore as I hauled myself over, landing hard on the other side. Shouts and pounding footsteps followed until headlights swept across me. A rideshare slowed at the sight of my panic, and I yanked open the door, collapsing inside. By the time I could breathe, the lot was gone. I didn't know if Eli was still there or if he'd even tried to stop me. All I knew was something between us had shattered beyond repair. I didn't go home. The driver, a middle-aged man with kind eyes, insisted on taking me straight to the police once I stammered out the bare bones of what happened. He even waited in the lot until I came back out. The desk officer listened, scribbled notes, asked for descriptions. Without photos, plates, or proof, it all felt paper-thin. We'll file a report, he said gently, like someone telling a child they'd keep a broken toy just in case. By the time I finally got home, the adrenaline had bled away, leaving me hollow and shaking. I took the longest shower of my life, water pounding my neck as if it could wash off the night. But nothing scrubbed away the image of Eli standing still, watching me get surrounded and doing nothing. The next morning I texted him. We need to talk, no reply. I called, straight to voicemail. Tried again that afternoon, sharper this time. I'm serious. What the hell was that? Call me, still nothing. By the 3rd day I drove to his apartment. The blinds were drawn. A strip of tape with a realty company's logo clung to the doorframe, like the locks had just been changed. The landlord, a guy in a worn Seahawks hoodie, told me Eli had moved out overnight. Said he'd taken a job back east, left the keys in the mailbox. I knew he was lying, or maybe Eli had lied to him too. Either way, Eli was gone. For weeks I caught myself scanning grocery store lines, checking bus stops, even glancing into dim bars when I walked past. Part of me wanted to see him, unshaven, sheepish, ready to explain. The other part, still raw from that night, didn't know if I'd shake his hand or drive my fist into his gut. Seattle slid into fall. Damp mornings and low gray skies pressing down on the city. I buried myself in work, telling myself deadlines would keep me from obsessing over someone who had chosen to disappear. It almost worked until Mason found me. I was cutting through the quiet streets near the marina after a late meeting when I smelled cigarette smoke. He stepped from a shadowed doorway, leather jacket the same as before. Been a while, he said with a faint smile. I froze. Where's Eli? He dragged slow on his cigarette, exhaling into the streetlight. Some people don't want to be found. That's not an answer. He tilted his head. It's the only one you're getting. Headlights swept the street and Mason melted back into the shadows. When the car passed, he was gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. His words looped in my head. Did Eli vanish by choice or because he couldn't return even if he wanted to? The next morning I filed another police report, but it felt like tossing pebbles into the ocean. They logged it, thanked me, promised nothing. I told myself to let go. Friends drift. People change. But I knew better. The city felt smaller now. Every alley and parking lot carrying the weight of a place Mason might appear again. Winter came early, Seattle's streets slick with rain colder than snow. By December, I'd stopped expecting Eli's name to light up my phone. Forgetting him was harder. He was everywhere. In the coffee shop we used to haunt, the empty space on a trail, the first chords of a song we both loved. One Friday night just before Christmas, I walked home along the waterfront. The pier smelled of salt and diesel. Just like the night everything had broken. That's when I saw him. Eli stood at the far end, hood up, hands buried in his pockets. For a second I thought about turning away. Then he lifted his head and met my eyes. I walked toward him, every step dragging up memories, each one tainted now. He didn't smile, didn't apologize, just said, "You shouldn't be here." "Neither should you," I shot back. He looked thinner, older somehow. "It's not safe," he said. "For you or for me? Both." I opened my mouth to demand answers. For that night, for disappearing, for using me as bait. But before I could, Mason emerged from the dark, his voice smooth as ever. "Time to go." Eli didn't fight it. He just gave me one last look, not guilt but close, and walked away with him. Their footsteps faded into the wet night. I didn't follow. After that, I stopped searching. Not because I didn't care, but because I finally understood. Eli hadn't been trapped. He'd chosen this path. Even if it meant burning every bridge between us. The police report from that first night still sat in a manila folder in my desk drawer. A quiet reminder of how fast trust can collapse. I never added to it. Never called again. Never walked the marina after dark. I rebuilt piece by piece, new friends, solo hikes, concerts where I stood at the back of the crowd. But sometimes, in the middle of an ordinary day, I'd catch myself scanning faces in a station or store, wondering if Eli was out there, watching from somewhere I couldn't see. I never saw Mason again. Months later, on a rainy March afternoon, a letter landed in my mailbox. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper and Eli's messy scrawl. "I'm sorry, man." I burned it in the sink before I could change my mind. Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones who put us in harm's way. Loyalty is powerful, but it should never cost you your safety or your self-respect. You can care deeply about someone and still choose to protect yourself. The hardest part isn't walking away. It's living with the truth that the person you thought you knew was never really who they were at all. If you've ever had a best friend who felt more like an extension of you than a separate person, you know how impossible it is to say no to them. That was Noah Bennett for me. Since we were 16, he'd been the gravitational pull in my life. Skateboards clattering down cracked sidewalks, greasy tacos eaten on school days we were supposed to be in class, a garage band that produced more noise than music. Back then we were always moving, always laughing, never thinking about where we'd land. Somewhere between graduation and our mid-20s, life started dividing us. I drifted onto the slow, predictable track, stable desk job in downtown Austin, bills paid on time, dinners in front of the TV most nights. Noah went the other way. He ricocheted between construction work, delivery gigs, bartending shifts, everything temporary because he was always chasing the next big thing. He liked being untethered, and though I never said it out loud, it worried me in ways that made me sound like a parent even in my own head. We saw each other less, maybe a beer every couple of weeks, but the bond was still there. Humming under everything, that's why. Late one night in September 2019, when my phone buzzed and Noah's name lit the screen, I answered before the second ring. "Hey man, can you pick me up? I'm at the old rail yard. Don't ask questions, just come." There was a tightness in his voice. Not exactly fear, but something just shy of it, like he was trying to keep it from breaking. "You okay?" I asked him. "Just come get me." I almost said no. I had work in the morning. But I grabbed my hoodie and my keys because history had taught me something about Noah. When he said, "Don't ask questions," it wasn't a suggestion. The rail yard was on the east side of the city, a place that looked abandoned even in daylight. At night, it felt like a set built for trouble. A single street lamp flickered weakly, and in the distance a freight train crawled past. its glow sliding over rows of rusting shipping containers. I saw movement near one of them. Noah emerged, breathing hard, clutching a black duffel bag like it was the only thing keeping him afloat. His clothes were damp, his hair plastered to his forehead, and there was a dark smear on his sleeve that my eyes kept going back to. "Drive," he said, yanking open the passenger door. I pulled away without asking where we were headed, but I couldn't ignore how his hands shook as he fumbled with the seatbelt. "You hurt?" I asked. "No. That's blood on your arm. It's not mine." The way he said it made my stomach knot. He started rattling off turns that didn't make sense, zigzagging us through neighborhoods, doubling back, avoiding main roads. Finally, I pulled over in an empty lot behind a strip mall. "Noah, tell me what's going on or I'm done." He stared straight ahead, his voice low and flat. "I messed up. I was supposed to deliver something for a guy I've been working for, not the kind of guy you say no to, but I saw what was in the package and I couldn't do it." I didn't ask what it was, his tone already told me more than I wanted to know. "They saw me leave," he added quietly. "I don't think they're going to let me walk away." At first I told myself he was just being paranoid. Noah always assumed the worst in people. But 20 minutes later, when headlights appeared behind us and stayed there no matter which turn I took, his paranoia became mine too. "Is that them?" I asked. "Yeah," he said, not even looking back. I cut through side streets, then into a quiet residential area. The car stayed with us. We ditched mine behind a closed supermarket, grabbed the duffel and ran through backyards, crouching low to avoid motion lights. My heart pounded so hard it was like I could hear it in my ears. When we finally reached my apartment, I locked the door, killed the lights, and tried to catch my breath. My phone buzzed. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. When I checked the transcript, it was only 5 words. "We know where you live." For the next week, Noah didn't leave my apartment. Curtains stayed drawn. TV stayed off. We barely spoke except for short, necessary exchanges about food or the bathroom. The silence pressed on me until it felt like the walls were leaning in. On the 8th morning, I woke to find the couch empty, the duffel gone, and no sign of forced entry, just gone. The strangest part wasn't the empty space where Noah had been. It was the quiet. For a week, even when we weren't speaking, there had been the subtle sounds of him moving around. Doors opening and closing, the fridge creaking, his footsteps pacing the living room at 3 in the morning. Now the apartment felt hollow, like the air itself had been vacuumed out. I checked my phone first, half expecting a text. Nothing. I tried calling. Straight to voicemail. No social media posts, no tags, no updates. It was as if he'd been erased. That day I went to work like nothing had happened. My coworkers asked if I was feeling all right, probably because I looked like I hadn't slept in days. I told them I was fine. That's what you do when the truth feels like a door you can't open without inviting something in. That night, I found myself replaying the rail yard in my head, the way Noah had been breathing, the blood on his sleeve, the weight of that duffel, the headlights in the rear view, the voice on the voicemail. I thought about going to the police, but what would I say? My friend was carrying something for a criminal. They followed us home. Now he's gone. That wouldn't end with help. It would end with questions I couldn't answer and doors I couldn't close again. 3 nights later, I woke from a dream where Noah was standing in my kitchen, asking me for water like nothing had happened. Only in the dream, when I turned to get a glass, he was gone again. That part felt real enough to make my chest ache when I woke. Weeks passed like that. The tension faded slowly like a bruise changing color, but every time I heard footsteps behind me or saw a car in my mirror for too long, the old fear rushed back. I never told my parents. I never told anyone, really. It became my own sealed vault of memory, locked because opening it meant letting all the danger spill back out. It was mid-November when the postcard arrived. The front was blank white, no picture, no stamp besides the one required to mail it. My address was written in Noah's uneven handwriting. On the back, just 8 words. "Better you stay away from me. It's safer." No return address. No clue where it had been sent from. I read it 3 times before setting it down. There was no date, but I could picture him writing it in some dim motel room, the duffel on the bed, eyes on the door. Maybe he'd been moving every night since he left. Maybe he was already somewhere far away. Or maybe he wasn't alive anymore. That thought crept in like a shadow and never really left. I kept the postcard in my desk drawer under a stack of utility bills and old photos. Every few months I'd take it out just to see if it felt different. It never did. It was like holding a frozen piece of time, a reminder that I'd been pulled into something I didn't understand and barely escaped. In the years since, I've learned to live with not knowing. People like to believe that if you care about someone enough, you can pull them back from wherever they're heading. But sometimes their road is already too far gone, and all you can do is watch them disappear around the bend. I still see him sometimes, not in person, but in strangers on the street, in a laugh from a passing table at a bar, in the way someone wears a baseball cap low over their eyes. I don't know if I'd even want him to reach out again. The truth might be worse than the mystery, but the thing about Noah Bennett is he's the kind of gravity you never fully escape. Some people we love are storms, beautiful, wild, unforgettable, but dangerous to stand too close to. You can care for them from a distance, but stepping into their world can mean losing your own. Sometimes survival means letting go before the sky breaks open. The night Denver changed for me didn't start with gunfire. It started with Ryan Mitchell's laugh echoing off the ambulance bay walls, bouncing between steel lockers and the faint reek of diesel. That laugh had been stitched into my life for years. We'd met back in 2011, two rookies sweating through paramedic training, practicing IV lines on each other's arms, learning how to sprint toward chaos while everyone else fled. Ryan was steady under pressure, the kind of guy who could crack a joke with a stabbing victim just to keep them awake while I worked the bleeding. Our friendship wasn't built on training manuals or hospital corridors alone. We'd crashed on each other's couches when relationships collapsed, split rent when money ran thin, and drowned bad shifts in dim-lit bars where exhausted first responders didn't have to explain themselves. It wasn't a friendship we thought about. It just existed, solid, dependable, like the monitor's beep in the back of the rig. By 2016, we'd been partners for 5 years. That October was unnaturally cold, the kind of cold that crawled through your coat and stayed in your bones. Late one Friday, our shift stretched past 12 hours when the dispatcher's voice crackled through. Reported shooting, multiple callers, West Point Motel. My first thought was that the West Point was bad news even in daylight. We rolled up to flashing blue and red lights, the night air stinging my cheeks as soon as I opened the door. A young man lay sprawled on the pavement in front of the motel office, hoodie soaked dark at the chest. Officers waved us forward. I dropped to my knees, slicing fabric, hunting for an entry wound. "Ryan, occlusive dressing," I said without looking up. Silence. I turned. He stood a few feet away, hands limp at his sides, eyes locked on the victim's face. Not shock, something heavier, a recognition that didn't belong here. "Ryan," I snapped, sharper. He blinked, moved toward me, handed over the dressing like his mind had been somewhere else entirely. We worked the case, but the kid was gone before we even left the scene. Back in the rig, Ryan sat in the passenger seat without a word. I let it go. Everyone handles loss differently. But his silence didn't fade. At first it was small, missed shifts, more beers after work than usual. Ryan had always blown off steam, but now it felt different. Quieter, like he was trying to bury something. He dodged my questions, changed the subject. Then, one evening in early November, he showed up at my apartment unannounced. His face looked thinner, skin pale under the porch light. "That kid," he said before I could even ask. At the motel, he was my cousin. I stepped aside. He came in, pacing my living room. "I didn't know he was running with those guys," Ryan muttered. "They know I know, but I think I know who pulled." His words dropped like stones. I opened my mouth to say we needed to go to the police, but he cut me off. "No, it'll make things worse. You have no idea what these people will do." I'd seen Ryan calm during rollover crashes and house fires, but now his voice trembled as if the cold had finally seeped into his bones. He stayed an hour, just long enough to drink half a cup of coffee and swear me to silence. When he left, I stood in the doorway long after his taillights faded, wondering what kind of trouble had just walked into my life with him. The days after Ryan's confession felt heavy, as though the air itself carried weight. At work he was half present, eyes scanning corners and alleyways as we drove. I told myself it was grief spilling into paranoia. But that theory cracked one Tuesday afternoon during a run to a cardiac arrest. We were rolling down K-Fax when I noticed a black SUV in the left lane, keeping perfect pace. Normally, I wouldn't think twice, but when we turned onto Grant Street, it turned too. A few blocks later, when we rerouted around construction, it appeared again in my mirror. "See that?" I asked. Ryan glanced back without turning his head. "Yeah, ignore it." That was when I realized he'd already noticed and wasn't surprised. It didn't stop there. Over the next week, the SUV showed up twice more. Once while we were parked outside the ER, once as we returned to the station. Each time it lingered just long enough for me to be certain, then slipped into traffic like smoke. Then came the message. It was a Friday night, bitterly cold, and I was just leaving the station after paperwork when my captain's voice cut through the dark. "You're going to want to see this," he said, leading me around to the far side of the building. Spray painted across the aluminum siding in jagged red letters, "You talk, you're next." The paint was still wet, glistening under the security lights. The words seemed to hum in the frozen air, sharp as a blade. My hands went numb inside my gloves. The captain didn't press me, didn't ask. He just called the police. They came, snapped photos, asked the routine questions. Did I have enemies? Did anyone have a reason to target me? I kept my answers clipped, but inside my head Ryan's voice echoed, "They know I know." When I told him about the graffiti, his face hardened. "You went to the captain?" "I had to," I shot back. "This isn't just about you anymore. They're threatening all of us. You don't get it." His voice snapped like breaking glass. "The more attention you bring, the closer they'll get." I pushed back, and for the first time in all our years, the air between us turned hostile. We didn't ride together the next shift. We didn't talk at all. By the following week, he'd taken a leave of absence. No warning, no goodbye, just gone. His locker stood half open, boots still inside like he'd be back any minute. But he never returned. Months dragged by in silence. I told myself he was lying low somewhere safe, that one day the phone would ring. The truth came 2 years later on a bright autumn afternoon, when I spotted him across a crowded intersection. He looked older, thinner, shadows carved beneath his eyes, a plain ball cap pulled low. He didn't wave. He didn't cross. He just watched me for a moment, unreadable, and then disappeared into the flow of strangers. I don't know if he was there to warn me or to remind me of the pact we never made but somehow lived by. Silence in exchange for survival. I never saw Ryan again, but his absence became part of the city itself. A hollow in the streets I drove, a ghost in every siren. When we passed the West Point Motel, my pulse quickened. When a black SUV slid into my mirror, even for a second, the old dread stirred. Work went on. Partners came and went, each with their quirks and rhythms. But no one filled the space Ryan left. People you've shared life and death with don't get replaced. They stay in your bones. Some nights after brutal calls, I'd find myself drifting past his old locker. The boots were long gone, another medic's gear in their place, but faint scuff marks on the floor still lingered. I'd think about how quickly it all unraveled. One call, one body on the pavement, a lifetime of loyalty collapsing into a secret I couldn't explain to anyone outside of it. What gnawed at me most wasn't just the threats, it was the truth Ryan carried. If he really knew who pulled the trigger that night, then somewhere out there a murderer was walking free, and because of fear, his and eventually mine, we'd let that truth rot in the dark. I tried once to track him down. Called an old roommate, reached out to a friend from training. They all said the same thing. If he's smart, he's keeping it that way. And maybe they were right. Staying gone was survival. Staying silent was protection. For him, for me, for anyone close enough to that motel's front door. But silence corrodes. It eats at you slow and steady. Every routine call, a bar fight, a domestic, another shooting, I felt the weight of what we didn't do. The name we never spoke. The case that never touched the system. I don't know if Ryan blames me for going to the captain. I don't know if he was grateful, furious, or simply resigned. All I know is that when he turned away from me at that intersection, something closed for good. Not just our friendship, something deeper. Not because of what happened, but because of what we both chose afterward, to carry it in silence. The lesson I'm left with is sharper than I'd like to admit. Loyalty is noble, but weighed against justice, you have to decide what you can live with. Protecting someone you care about might mean letting the truth die. And the real danger is realizing you can. I still answer every call, still run toward the chaos, still do my job. But there's a part of me now that always listens for the hum of a black SUV behind us, or looks twice at the stranger in a crowd. Not from fear exactly, from the knowledge that some stories don't end. They just stop being told. It's strange how a memory can feel like it belongs to a dream, soft and hazy, until you start pulling at the details and the edges harden into something real. I remember the warmth of the air that night, heavy like a blanket, the way the light above the parking lot flickered too slowly, like a heartbeat just a little off, and the sound, footsteps echoing in a hallway where there shouldn't have been any. That trip in May 2019 was supposed to be nothing more than a much-needed escape. A long weekend away from our cramped apartment, away from the endless hum of college life in Flagstaff, away from the kind of stress that makes you feel like your bones are tired. Sophie Hale had been my best friend for 6 years by then. We met in sophomore year of high school. Two awkward kids bonded over late-night diner coffee and a shared knack for finding trouble in small towns. In college, we somehow managed to stay roommates without killing each other, though it meant tolerating the constant soundtrack of her late-night documentaries and my bad habit of eating cereal at 3 a.m. That was exactly when she found the hotel in Santa Fe online, an old roadside place off Route 285 with bright turquoise doors and a neon cactus sign that buzzed faintly, even in the photos. "It's quirky," she said, grinning over her laptop. "We'll be like Thelma and Louise without the crime spree." Our first day was exactly what we needed. We wandered through art galleries until our feet ached, bought more turquoise jewelry than either of us could justify, and sat in a hole-in-the-wall restaurant eating green chili enchiladas until the owners gently hinted it was closing time. The air was warm and carried the faint smell of mesquite smoke as we drove back to the hotel, laughing about nothing in particular. And then I saw him. He was standing under the far streetlight at the edge of the lot, hands buried in his pockets, head tilted slightly as if studying something in the dark. The flickering bulb made his outline shift like a badly cut frame in an old film reel. I wouldn't have thought much of it if not for the way his eyes seemed to lock on us as soon as we pulled in. "Do you know him?" I asked quietly. Sophie glanced his way without slowing down. "Nope. Probably just another guest." We got to our room, locked the door, and pulled the curtains tight. Sophie flipped on the TV, her voice casual as she told me not to start imagining things, but something about the way his gaze had lingered stuck with me, like he wasn't just looking but recognizing. It was close to midnight when I heard the footsteps. They were slow at first, then nearer, deliberate. Sophie muted the TV. We both sat there waiting. The sound stopped right outside our door. Then came the knock, not a polite tap, but a single heavy thud against the wood. I went to the peephole. The man from the parking lot stood perfectly still, eyes fixed forward. He didn't sway. He didn't shift. He just waited. We didn't answer. After a long moment, he turned and walked away. The sound of his footsteps faded, but it didn't feel like he'd gone far. The next morning, we went down for breakfast in the small lobby. I spotted him immediately, sitting alone by the window, stirring his coffee in slow circles, but never lifting it to his mouth. Sophie avoided looking at him, but I couldn't help noticing the way his eyes followed us as we walked past. Not a glance, a steady, unblinking track until we stepped outside. We tried to enjoy the day, wandering through museums and lingering over street food, but I found myself checking over my shoulder more than once. No one was there, but that didn't make me feel any better. When we came back that evening, the hallway to our room was empty. We had just reached our door when I heard it again, footsteps behind us, fast and deliberate. Sophie fumbled with the key card. I turned just enough to see him. He was closing the distance, his eyes locked on us like they'd been in the parking lot. We slipped inside, the door latching just as he reached it. Another single knock, then silence. The front desk clerk didn't seem particularly concerned when we called. "Ma'am," she said, her voice tinny through the phone. "Unless he tries to enter your room, there's not much we can do. He's probably just another guest." I looked at Sophie, who was sitting cross-legged on the bed, the remote still in her hand, her brows knit together. "What if he's not?" I asked the clerk, a pause. Then we'll make a note in the system. We hung up, neither of us feeling better. Sophie tried to distract herself with some cooking show, but I found myself staring at the narrow gap between the bottom of the curtains and the carpet. The light outside shifted occasionally when someone passed by. Every time my heart jumped. That night I barely slept. Around 2 hours in the morning, I heard the faint creak of the floorboards in the hallway. Not walking, just one sound like someone shifting their weight. Then nothing. I told myself it was just the building settling, but I stayed awake until the sun edged over the blinds. The next day we started moving like shadows, timing our exits to the rhythm of other people's footsteps. If we heard voices in the corridor, we waited until they faded before opening our door. We stopped taking the elevator and used the narrow stairwell closest to the lobby, its paint chipped and damp from years of use. It was exhausting, but the thought of seeing him again in some quiet stretch of carpeted hallway was worse. By the third day, we were counting down the hours until checkout. We planned to leave before dawn, but that evening we made the mistake of staying out just a little too long. When we returned, the parking lot was dimmer than usual. 2 of the overhead lights had gone out, leaving pockets of darkness between the cars. Sophie quickened her pace, the keycard already in her hand. I was right behind her when I heard it again. Footsteps. This time they weren't slow. They were fast, coming closer, pounding softly against the pavement like a heartbeat. We both turned. He was there, moving quickly, no expression on his face, like a shadow with a purpose. We reached the door, shoved it open, and slammed it shut behind us. My hands shook as I slid the security latch into place. The knock came immediately, harder than before. Then silence. We didn't sleep at all that night. We sat up with the TV on low, half expecting another knock, the flickering screen throwing pale light across the room. But there was nothing, just the hum of the air conditioner and the occasional car passing on the highway. By morning, we were ready to leave. We packed in silence, each of us moving like we'd been awake for days. When we carried our bags to the lobby, the clerk at the desk glanced up and said, "Checking out early?" I wanted to tell her everything, the knocks, the footsteps, the way he just stood there, but the words felt heavy and useless in my throat. Outside, the air was already warm. We loaded our bags into the car. Sophie shut the trunk, then froze. He was leaning against a silver sedan at the far end of the lot, arms crossed loosely. This time he was smiling. Not a wide grin, just a small, knowing curl of the lips. "Have a safe trip," he said. We didn't answer. We got in the car, locked the doors, and drove. It wasn't until we hit the highway that Sophie spoke. I don't think he was a guest. Neither did I. We drove the first 20 miles in silence, the desert flattening out around us, the morning sun turning everything gold. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see that silver sedan trailing us, but the road behind was empty. It wasn't until we stopped for gas near Espanola that we spoke again. Sophie leaned against the car, arms folded, eyes scanning the lot. "Do you think he knew what room we were in?" she asked. I thought about the knocks. Always stopping at our door. Never anyone else's. "Yeah," I said quietly. "I think he knew." The rest of the drive to Flagstaff felt longer than the trip out had. Every roadside motel and quiet parking lot made me uneasy. It wasn't just fear of him following us. It was the realization that there are people who can slip into your life so quietly, without breaking a single law you can prove, and still make you feel hunted. When we got home, I double-checked the locks before I even unpacked. That night, Sophie called her older brother, a police officer in Phoenix, and told him the whole story. He didn't laugh it off. "If it happens again," he said, "call the police right away. Keep records. Times, dates, everything." Weeks went by and nothing happened. No strange knocks. No unfamiliar cars parked outside our place. But every time I walked down a long hallway, in an office, a hotel, even the school library, I caught myself listening for footsteps behind me. Sophie and I never stayed in a budget motel again. We read reviews more carefully, checked parking lots before unloading our bags, and asked for rooms close to the lobby. It wasn't paranoia so much as realizing how thin the line is between harmless and dangerous, and how often you can't tell which side someone is on until it's too late. Sometimes I wonder who he was, if he really was just another guest. But I keep coming back to one thing. He never had luggage. Not once. I still hear those footsteps sometimes, even in my dreams. Slow at first, then faster, closing the gap. And I always wake up before the knock. Some people you meet by chance. Others seem to find you on purpose. The hard truth is you may never know which kind you're dealing with until you're already too close. Trust the feeling in your gut even if you can't explain it. Safety doesn't always come from being right. Sometimes it comes from acting before you're sure.